She had 5 sons. She traded 50 years of her life to raise them. She traded thousands of meals so they could eat, and countless sleepless nights so they could be warm. And when she was 78, collapsed on her floor, the only thing she received in return was 5 excuses, 5 promises, and 0 sons who came back. This isn't just a story. This is a true tragedy of sacrifice and indifference. If you're listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they shake your faith. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. It was the neighbor from apartment 3, Mrs. Margaret, who noticed something was wrong. The kettle whistled at 7 a.m., just as it had every morning for the last 20 years. Beatrice Miller, 78, moved with the slow, deliberate grace of old age. She poured the steaming water into a floral mug, her eyes drifting to the wall above her small kitchen table. 5 frames hung there, one for each of them. Michael, Robert, David, Thomas, and Daniel. She smiled, a faint tremor at the corner of her lips. It was Michael's birthday next week. She had already bought a card, a simple one, with bluebirds and written inside, "Thinking of you, my son. Love. Mom." She hoped he would call. She took her mug and a piece of dry toast to her armchair by the window. This was her ritual. Watch the city wake up, pray for their safety, and wait. She waited for the phone to ring. She waited for a text. She waited for the sound of footsteps that knew their way home. That morning, like most mornings, the phone remained silent. She finished her toast, sighed, and pushed herself up to start her day, her hand pressing against a sudden, sharp ache in her chest. "It's just the cold," she murmured. But as she reached for the sink, the room tilted. The floral mug slipped from her grasp, shattering on the linoleum. And as the darkness pulled her down, her last conscious thought wasn't of fear. It was of disappointment. They didn't even call. By that time, Beatrice should have already opened her little window, swept the front walk, and greeted her with her classic, "God bless you." But that day, nothing. Not a sound, not a movement. Margaret had a key. Beatrice had given it to her months ago, just in case. When she entered, she saw her on the floor with the fallen pot, the wet floor, and the old woman barely trembling. "Beatrice, dear Lord. Beatrice, what happened?" Beatrice barely murmured something, but Margaret didn't understand. She called 911 with a trembling hand, and in less than 20 minutes, the ambulance arrived. They took her to Philadelphia General Hospital. No ID, no companion, no emergency number written down. They admitted her for observation. Low blood pressure, a wound on her forehead, minor burns, and a silence that hurt more than all of it combined. A young nurse, Emily, received her. She was just 27, with a calm face and a steady gaze. Seeing Beatrice's condition, she approached slowly and asked, "Do you have family, ma'am? Someone we can call?" Beatrice blinked. She took a deep breath, swallowed, and in a soft voice, like someone who doesn't want to be overheard saying what hurts the most, she replied, "I had 5 children, but it seems none of them had me." Emily stood still. She would never forget that sentence. Beatrice didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of woman. She had cried too much when she was young. Now, she had neither the strength nor the tears, only resignation. She spent hours with her gaze fixed on the hospital ceiling, thinking of Michael, the eldest, the one who said that everything he was, he owed to her. Now he didn't even answer her texts. Of Robert, the serious one, who once promised to buy her a house. He never did. Of David, who went to California and never came back. Of Thomas, who let his wife forbid him from visiting his mother. And of Daniel, her baby, the sweetest one, the one who told her "I love you" the most, the one who didn't even answer her last call. That night, Beatrice asked for a pen and paper. The nurse, Emily, brought them to her. Beatrice wrote a single sentence, folded it, and put it under her pillow. No one knew what it said. Not yet. But on that piece of paper was something that would change everything. The nurse, Emily, returned to the room with a firm step but a tense face. In her hand, she held a small notebook she had found in Beatrice's cloth bag, next to an old coin purse and a worn rosary. The notebook was covered in flowered contact paper. It had large letters written in blue ink, with the names of her sons, one per page. The first one said, Michael Miller. Seeing the notebook, Beatrice tried to sit up. She couldn't, only managing to turn her neck slightly. There's the number for my oldest son, Michael. He's in New York City, works at a big bank. He was always the most responsible. Emily nodded and went out to make the call. In the staff room, she dialed slowly, dreading what she would find on the other end of the line. It took several rings for someone to answer. Hello? A mature man's voice, curt, like someone who's been in a hurry since they woke up. Mr. Michael Miller? Emily asked in a professional tone. I'm calling from Philadelphia General Hospital. We have your mother, Beatrice Miller, here. She suffered a fall this morning and was admitted urgently. Silence on the other end. She's fine, stable, but she needs observation. She's alone. She didn't have any family with her. We'd like to know if someone can come. The silence grew longer. Then the voice lowered, somewhat uncomfortable. Look, miss, I'm in the middle of a meeting. There's no way I can get away right now. Isn't there anyone else? Your brothers, perhaps? She asked us to contact you first. Yes. Well, I'm in New York City. I have to travel tomorrow, and I have meetings all day. She's in good hands there, right? She's being cared for, but she has no company. I'm sorry. It's impossible for me right now. If anything serious happens, let me know. And he hung up. Emily held the receiver in her hand for a few seconds. It wasn't the first time she had heard that kind of response, but it hurt just the same. She returned to the room with slow steps. Beatrice saw her enter and didn't ask, just looked at the nurse's face and understood. He's very busy? She asked in a thin voice. Emily nodded slowly. He says he has meetings, that he can't come. Beatrice closed her eyes. Meetings. The word echoed in her mind. She remembered a meeting of her own, 25 years ago. She had been called to Michael's high school. The principal. She had to leave her cleaning shift early, losing half a day's pay she couldn't afford, just to sit and listen to them praise his potential. She'd sat there, her hands raw from bleach, smelling of ammonia, and beamed with pride. She had made time for his meeting. Her lips tightened. He was always a hard worker, she murmured, her voice hollow. But I thought that if I ever fell, he would come running. The first son, the responsible one, fails her. Beatrice finds an excuse for him, as mothers so often do. But there are 4 sons left. Surely, one of them will come. Do you want us to try another of your sons? Beatrice nodded slowly. She pointed to the notebook. Robert. He lives in Pittsburgh. He has a big house. Maybe he can. Emily left again. As she was leaving the room, she glanced back one last time. Beatrice was still in the same position, her gaze fixed on the wall. In New York City, meanwhile, Michael was sitting in front of his computer, reviewing reports. His wife, Linda, brought him a coffee. Who called you? From the hospital in Philadelphia. My mom fell. And? They say she's fine, nothing serious. But they want someone to be with her. Linda took a sip of her coffee and shrugged. And what do they expect? For you to leave your job and go all the way there? Michael didn't answer. He looked at the screen as if the answer were there. In truth, he didn't feel anger. He felt a silent mix of shame, annoyance, and something deeper, something he didn't want to name. Emily tried Robert's number. The phone rang 4 times before a woman answered. Hello? Good afternoon. Could I speak with Mr. Robert Miller? Who's calling? I'm Nurse Emily from Philadelphia General Hospital. I'm calling about Beatrice, his mother. She's been admitted here. She had a fall this morning. A few seconds of silence. Then Robert's voice, loud, brusque. What happened? Don't worry, she's stable, but she's alone. She asked us to call you. We just wanted to know if you can come or if another family member. Look, miss, I'm going to tell you something straight. I've already done a lot for my mom. When she had her hip surgery, who was there? Me. When she had bronchitis, who paid for the medicine? Me. And my brothers? Thanks for nothing. I understand, but she's alone. Yes, but I have my own family too, you know. My wife, my kids, my job. I can't be carrying everything. Let the others take turns. We were just informing you." "Well, now you're informed. Good afternoon." And he hung up. When she returned to the room, Beatrice didn't ask anything anymore. She was with her eyes closed, but not asleep. She could hear the low volume of the TV in the hallway and the sound of keys clinking against a metal tray. Emily sat on the edge of the bed and adjusted the sheet. "Your son Robert is also busy. He says he has kids and a job." Beatrice nodded without opening her eyes. His family. She remembered the nights, not so long ago, when Robert's wife had postpartum. Beatrice had taken the bus, a 4-hour round trip, to stay with them for a week. She'd cooked, cleaned, and walked their crying newborn daughter at 3 a.m. so Robert could be rested for his job. She had been their family then. "He's right," she whispered, a single, cold tear tracing a path into her hairline. "He has a family. He's done enough already." Emily wanted to say something to change the weight of those words. But she couldn't find a way. Beatrice slowly turned her head toward the window. Outside, a tree on the hospital grounds moved its branches in the wind. It was a cool, blue day, but inside her, everything was gray. "Can you bring me some tea later?" she asked in a low voice. "Of course, Beatrice." Emily left in silence. She knew that this woman was swallowing an ocean without letting anyone see it. In Beatrice's notebook, the names that followed were David, Thomas, and Daniel. The page was marked, the paper stained by time, and next to each name, a number, a past, and perhaps one last hope. Nurse Emily left the room without another word. In her hand, she carried Beatrice Miller's notebook, the one with the large letters and the ink smudged by time. As the door closed slowly behind her, Beatrice was left staring at the white hospital ceiling. But she wasn't seeing the ceiling, or the walls, or even herself lying there. What she saw was far away, far back in time. She was 28 when he left. His name was Eugene, but everyone in the neighborhood called him Slick. Not because he was thin, but because he was slippery. He'd appear and disappear. Beatrice had married him at 19, more out of necessity than love. Her mother was sick, her father absent, and he promised her the world, though he never even brought home enough for lunch. When Michael, the first, was born, Beatrice believed everything would change, that being a father would make him a man, that he would stay, but it wasn't so. 2 years later, they had Robert, and Beatrice had already learned to make pies to sell on the sidewalk. Because Eugene was always looking for work, but never brought home a single dollar. With the third, David, Beatrice was already sewing other people's clothes at night, lit by a candle, while listening to her son's cough in the same bed. And it was then, pregnant with the fourth, that Eugene never came back. "Just going out for cigarettes," he said that April afternoon, closing the door with his shirt unbuttoned and an old hat on his head. But he didn't return. Beatrice waited a week, then another, then she stopped counting. There was no letter, no notice, no body, just absence. His family wanted nothing to do with her. "Well, if he left you, you must have done something," a sister-in-law told her. "He wasn't the man for you from the beginning." And Beatrice, with 3 children under 5 and a belly that was already moving inside her, was left alone. No money, no house of her own, no family name to defend her. She cried only once, in the middle of the night, when everyone was asleep, sitting on a wooden chair that Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor, had lent her, clutching a small rag with both hands, as if she could hold up the world that was crashing down on her. Then she got up, washed her face, and never cried again. She went to the old St. Francis Church to ask for help. Father John gave her a basket with rice, beans, 2 bars of soap, and 3 candles, and a phrase, "God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers." But Beatrice didn't feel like a soldier. She felt tired, hungry, scared, and with a promise caught in her throat. "My children will not go through what I went through, even if I have to work myself to the bone." She found work cleaning houses. A lady downtown hired her to sweep, mop, and iron. They paid her $20 a day. It was little, but it was something. She would leave while the children were asleep. She left them in the care of Mrs. Gable, an elderly neighbor, in exchange for handmade bread and hot cocoa in the afternoons. She would return with swollen feet, her hands cracked from the bleach, and her hair full of dust, but always with a smile on her face. The first thing she did upon entering was hug her children. "Tonight, the 5 of us eat," she would announce, referencing herself, the 3 boys and the child in her womb. "And you all," she'd say to the boys, "you eat for 2. Thomas was born in the middle of that storm. The birth was at home. Mrs. Gable was her midwife. The loneliness of the following year was a different kind of hunger, and in a moment of desperate vulnerability, a brief relationship with a traveling salesman, a man who was kind for a week and gone forever, the next led to her 5th pregnancy. When Daniel, the youngest, came into the world, Beatrice was already an expert at resisting. She bore the neighborhood's silent judgment with the same stoicism she bore the cold, treating Daniel with a fierce, protective love, as if to shield him from a world that would question his beginning. There were no new diapers or clean clothes, but there were arms, warmth, courage. And when she finally held the baby to her chest, Beatrice felt that the world had not defeated her. "You are going to get ahead, my son, even if I stay behind." The neighbors began to respect her. "There goes Beatrice, the one who made it on her own. That's a real mother, not like some others." But Beatrice wasn't looking for respect. She was trying to hold her world together with her bare hands, and day by day, she did it. 1 pie at a time, an ironed uniform in exchange for bread, a mended dress for 2 coins. When Daniel, the youngest, came into the world, Beatrice was already an expert at resisting. She had him in the hospital, thanks to a collection the neighbors took up. He was the only child who knew a real mattress from birth, and he was also the only one who looked at her with eyes that said without words, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll always be with you." And she believed him. The way one believes the beautiful things needed to keep living. Years later, with all 5 in school, Beatrice would watch them from the kitchen, Michael teaching the multiplication tables to the youngest, Robert sweeping the patio, David singing while washing the dishes, Thomas building towers out of empty jars, and Daniel, always close, always attentive, would arrange his mother's shoes without her asking. "I don't need anyone else," she would think. "They are enough for me." And she believed it. Until the day when, from a hospital bed, decades later at 78 years old, none of those sons could answer the phone. On her pillow, the handwritten note was still there, just 1 line, but with a decision she had no intention of changing, because it wasn't anger or resentment. It was something sadder, a certainty that had been growing inside her for years, a seed that had blossomed in silence. The day she saw that not even her most noble son had called to ask if she needed anything, the tree Beatrice saw from her hospital bed no longer moved. The wind had stopped, and with it, the world she knew. Her body was still weak, and her thoughts even more so. But between the white curtain that separated her bed from the hallway, a gust of memories began to open up, as if someone were pulling back the veil of time. She was no longer in the hospital. She was in Lancaster, in the yard of the house she had rented for more than 20 years. A lot with a packed earth patio, a concrete utility sink for washing clothes by hand, and a clothesline that stretched across the entire space. There she had them all, her 5 sons. Her 5 sons, though they didn't always shine together. Michael was the eldest, serious from a young age, observant, always wanting to protect his brothers, but also the first to impose order with a firm voice. At 7, he was already asking if there was enough money. At 10, he knew how to add and subtract better than Beatrice. "You're going to be a professional," she would tell him. He would lower his gaze and nod, always obedient. But even then, there was something distant in his eyes, as if since childhood he knew the world wasn't fair, and so he preferred not to get too attached to anyone, not even his mother. Robert, on the other hand, was the emotional one. He got angry easily, laughed louder, cried without shame. He was the first to defend David when he was bullied at school for not having new shoes, and also the first to say, "This isn't fair," when Beatrice served more beans than rice because there wasn't enough for both. "Mom, if there's not enough, tell me, I won't eat." "Of course you'll eat, child." "Here, everyone eats, even if I don't." Robert wore his heart on his sleeve. He was intense, but noble. That's why, when he grew up and had his own family, Beatrice thought he would be the one to stay closest, but he was the first to distance himself completely. David, the middle child, always lived in his own world. He invented stories, drew on the walls, sang songs Beatrice didn't know. A quiet but imaginative boy. That one's going to be an artist, Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor would say, or he's going to fly far away. And he flew. He was the first to move across the country, the first to send money for a few months, the first to forget where he came from. Thomas was the quietest, the most obedient, the one who stayed by Beatrice's side while the others played, the one who would sit and pick cilantro leaves, the one who listened without interrupting, but also the one who most sought everyone's approval, and that made him weak. Beatrice knew it, which is why she always told him, "You have to learn to say what you feel, son. Otherwise, you'll let others decide for you." Thomas would just smile and stay silent, as he still does to this day. And Daniel, the youngest, the sweetest, the one who slept pressed against her back until he was 8, the one who wrote "I love you, Mom" notes with colored markers, the one who swore 1,000 times he would never leave her alone. Daniel had something in his eyes that disarmed her, something of tenderness, of attachment, of a silent promise. "Mom, if you die, I'll die with you." And Beatrice would squeeze his hand, crying inside, and think, "You will be with me until the end." But endings are not always like dreams, and sometimes the most affectionate child is the one who gets the most lost. The 5 of them grew up together in that yard. They played with marbles in the dirt. They hung sheets as if they were castles. They fought over the last slice of bread with cheese. They laughed, cried, and hugged in front of the stove while Beatrice heated coffee with brown sugar. The nights were cold, but Beatrice covered them all with whatever she had, even if it meant going without a blanket herself. And on more than one occasion, she went to bed without dinner, just to watch them sleep with full bellies. "As long as they're okay, I'm at peace." One afternoon, when Michael was 14, he came home with a folder from the local high school. He had been accepted. Beatrice burst into tears. "You're going to study, my son. You're going to be someone." Michael didn't say much, just nodded. But from that afternoon, Beatrice sewed non-stop for over a week to buy him his school supplies. She even sold her wedding ring, the only physical memory of Eugene, to buy him the black shoes that were required. She didn't say it that day, but inside she thought, "This son will be grateful to me for the rest of his life." And yes, he was grateful, for a time. Now, in the hospital, Beatrice remembered all of it. The wooden house, the stove, the laughter, the yard with the 5 of them, and also the silences that came later. The first times they didn't come for dinner, the calls they stopped making, the visits that grew more and more distant, until she was left like this, with a notebook in her hand, a body that no longer responded, and a question that echoed in her soul. At what point did they leave me, if I never let them go? Nurse Emily entered at that moment. She was carrying a small cup of tea. She placed it on the small table next to the bed. Beatrice looked at her and smiled weakly. "Thank you, dear. You're welcome, Beatrice. Are you feeling better?" "I don't know," she answered softly. "I feel like I'm hurting from a memory I don't know how to stop remembering." Emily remained silent, only managing to gently pat her shoulder. Beatrice turned her head toward the window. The tree was moving with the wind again. A dry leaf detached and fell slowly to the ground. She followed it with her eyes until it disappeared from view. Then, without taking her eyes off the sky, she murmured, "There are 3 names left in that notebook, right?" Nurse Emily checked the notebook again. 3 names were left to be called: David, Thomas, and Daniel. Before leaving the room, she asked Beatrice if she'd prefer to wait a bit longer. "We can call another one later if you want to rest for a little while," but Beatrice shook her head. Slowly. "Better do it now, dear, one by one. That way, if none of them can come, I won't be left wondering." Emily nodded gently and left without another word. Beatrice stared at the tea that was still warm on the table. She didn't drink it, just watched the steam rise slowly, as if counting the seconds of hope she had left. Emily returned to the room. Beatrice barely looked up. "He didn't answer." "Yes, he did, but he can't come right now. It's complicated." Beatrice looked down. "Complicated," she repeated. "Everything is complicated when it's about an old mother." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She went over to place the blanket over Beatrice's feet, which were starting to get cold. "And the next one?" Beatrice asked before Emily left. Emily opened the notebook. It was David's turn. At that moment, David was at an auto shop in California. He was wearing a grease-stained t-shirt and an old cap. He was fixing an old car when his cell phone rang. He looked at the screen, an unknown number from Pennsylvania. He hesitated, then answered, "Hello? Mr. David Miller?" "Speaking. I'm calling from Philadelphia General Hospital. Your mother, Beatrice Miller, has been admitted. She's fine, stable, but alone. She asked us to call you." David was silent for a few seconds, then wiped his hands on a dirty rag and moved away from the noise of the shop. "And what do you want me to do? Do you think it's possible for you to come or to contact another family member?" she asked for you. "Look, it's not that I don't want to, but I'm in California. I can't just cross the country like that. And besides, what's the point of going if she didn't even want me when I lived there?" Emily was surprised. "She never said that. She doesn't say it, but you feel it. I was the quiet one, the one who was good for nothing. She always said Michael was the one who would be someone and that Robert had character. I was the invisible one. Sir, she didn't ask for explanations. She just asked to speak with you. Well, tell her she'll be fine, to take care of herself, and that if she ever really needs me, she should find a professional. I have another life here now." And he hung up. The phone was still in Emily's hand when she went out into the hallway. She squeezed the device tightly, as if she could rewind the conversation. She entered the room in silence. "What did he say?" Beatrice asked without looking at her. Emily hesitated. She didn't know whether to lie or disguise the truth, but Beatrice already knew. "He's out on the West Coast. He says he can't come, but that he's worried about you. The nurse has to soften the blow, but we know the truth. He blamed her. 3 sons down, and the rejection is suffocating. Only one hope remains. Her youngest." Beatrice didn't answer, just closed her eyes, and for the first time, a single tear escaped from the corner of her left eye. Emily wiped it away without saying anything. "Do you want me to let you rest for a bit?" she asked softly. "No, there's still one more." Emily swallowed. She knew who she was referring to. Daniel. The youngest, the most beloved, the one who hadn't responded to anything so far. Beatrice took a breath, tried to adjust herself, but the pain in her side stopped her. Emily helped her sit up slightly. Beatrice reached out her hand and asked for her notebook. Emily handed it to her. Beatrice opened it to the last page, where in larger letters it said, "Daniel, my boy. Call him, dear. Sometimes he takes a while, but he always answers." Emily nodded in silence. Emily decided a text message might be less intrusive. She dialed the number with trembling fingers, but then erased it and opened her messaging app. She wrote, "Mr. Daniel Miller, this is Nurse Emily from Philadelphia General. Your mother, Beatrice, is here, and she is asking for you." She sent it. A minute later, the notification on her screen changed from delivered to read. The read notification on the phone was like a stone thrown from a great height, silent as it fell, but impossible to ignore. Emily stared at the screen for several more seconds, waiting for the 3 dots to appear, indicating that Daniel was typing something. But nothing. She went back to the room, this time without hurrying. Beatrice no longer asked, just looked out the window as if up there, in the sky, she could find something that wasn't being given to her on Earth. Emily left the phone on the table without a single word. Beatrice turned her head slowly and understood everything. Her face didn't contort with sadness, nor with anger. It was more as if something inside her had quietly turned off. But after a few seconds, she sighed. "Do you know what hurts the most, miss?" "What, Beatrice?" "That I never let anyone hurt them. Never. Not their teachers, not their uncles, not the neighbors, not the rude kids at school. No one. I was the first to defend them, the one who went and stood up for them, the one who faced whatever came for them." Emily sat on the edge of the bed without saying a word. "And now, not one of them has the courage to tell me, even half-heartedly, 'I'm coming, Mom.' I'm not asking them to carry me or support me, or give me a house. I just wanted to see their faces one more time before God closes my eyes." A deep silence enveloped the room. Beatrice closed her eyes and, for a moment, let herself be carried away by the gentle darkness of her memory. She didn't go toward the pain, but toward the memory that still sustained her, that man who asked her to marry him when her children were still young, and how she, out of loyalty to the love she believed she had for her children, refused the idea of remaking her life. His name was Walter, a widower with no children. He had a small shoe repair business in downtown Lancaster. Beatrice met him because she sewed the buttons on his shirts in exchange for him mending her children's shoes. He always spoke to her with respect, softly, as if he knew she came from a world where people spoke by yelling. "Beatrice, would you like to go for a coffee one of these days?" Beatrice would laugh. "I have coffee every day, Walter, but with 5 creatures hanging from my apron. Do you think I can sit down and drink it like a normal person?" And he, without taking offense, would reply, "Then one day I'll bring it to you here, and you can let me keep you company from the sidewalk." For almost a year, Walter came every Sunday with a small bag of sweet rolls and 2 coffees. They would sit at the entrance of the house, Beatrice sewing, him talking about life. One afternoon, without warning, he brought her a ring. "It's not expensive, but it's honest. I'm not here to promise you luxuries. I just want to take care of you and help you with the children." Beatrice was silent for a long time. She looked at the 5 of them playing in the yard, at Daniel running with torn pants, at David singing an invented song, at Thomas following Robert with a stick in his hand, and at Michael, already with a serious gaze, yelling at them to be quiet. And then she said, "You're not sure?" Walter asked without anger. "Yes, because if one day this doesn't work out, they will blame me, and I don't want any of them to tell me tomorrow that I preferred a man over them." Walter left without making a scene and never came back. Beatrice kept the ring in a small wooden box that she still had for years. She never wore it, never regretted it. Until now. In the hospital, Beatrice opened her eyes. Emily was still there, and she asked, "Have you ever loved so much that you forget about yourself?" Emily thought of her mother, her younger sister, the life she led between night shifts and loneliness. She thought of her father, who left when she was 8. "Yes, I think so. Then you'll understand me when I say that I never thought of myself, that I lived for them. And now, when I see myself lying here with no one, I wonder if I did the right thing." Emily pressed her lips together to hold back the words that wanted to come out. Instead, she got up and looked for the sheet where she had recorded the vital signs. "I'm going to check your pressure, okay?" "Yes, dear." Emily approached and placed the device. While the cuff inflated, Beatrice looked out the window. "Do you think that if I die here, anyone will notice?" Emily took a moment to respond. "I will." Beatrice smiled for the first time in days, a brief, fragile smile. "You have a mother, don't you?" "Yes, she lives in Ohio. I call her every week. Don't stop doing it. Even if she says she's fine, even if it seems she doesn't need it, call her, go see her, because a mother doesn't ask, but she waits." That night, while Beatrice slept, Emily opened a drawer at the foot of the bed to store the notebook. As she moved it, a folded piece of paper fell out. She unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a prescription or a phone number. It was a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. It didn't have a date either, but it was written in black ink and with trembling handwriting. Emily didn't read it. She just folded it again and put it back where it was. She closed the drawer and stood looking at Beatrice. She felt something she couldn't explain, something that told her this woman shouldn't die alone, that there was still something pending, something important, and that maybe it wasn't too late to do something more. When her shift ended, Emily didn't go straight home. She walked to the hospital cafeteria where the coffee machine was, inserted a coin, and while the slow drops fell into the styrofoam cup, she looked at her cell phone. The conversation with David was still there. The call from the West Coast. She mentally reread that sentence. "I have another life here now." As if the one Beatrice gave them was a draft, an accident, something left behind when crossing the country. She didn't know him, but at that moment she felt something akin to rage for him. And what hurt her most was the thought that Beatrice would never know the exact words of her sons, because she, though she seemed resigned, still defended them inside. When she returned to the room, she found Beatrice awake, her eyes fixed on the wall, but her body elsewhere. Emily said nothing, just sat beside her. "Do you like the rain, ma'am?" she asked suddenly, as if looking for an escape. Beatrice turned her head slowly. When it falls hard and there's no one home, it makes you feel even more alone. But when your children are asleep and you hear the rain outside and you know they're dry, warm, then yes, then the rain is beautiful. Emily smiled sadly. You know what? I'd like to know more about you. Not what your sons say, what you've lived. Beatrice sighed, then closed her eyes, and in that internal darkness, her memory took her to a morning when the sky was cloudy, but the yard was full of noise. A day when everything seemed to be going well, and yet something inside her was beginning to warn of what was to come. It was a Sunday, the year 2002. David had just announced that he was going to California. He said it in a neutral, almost cold tone. I've made up my mind, Mom. I'll do better there. There's no future here. Beatrice didn't respond immediately, just looked at him with that mix of concern and pride that mothers feel when a son decides to leave. She made him coffee and buttered toast, his favorite, and waited for the others to go to the store to talk alone. And who's waiting for you there? She asked. A friend of a cousin. He says he can get me a job as a helper in construction. They pay in dollars there. In 3 months, I'll send you money. I don't want your money, David, but you're going to need it. We're not kids anymore. You don't have to carry us all. Beatrice fell silent. She looked down at the plastic tablecloth. There was an old salsa stain that never came out, and she stared at it as if what she didn't know how to say was written there. Are you leaving to not come back? David shrugged. I don't know. Maybe I'll stay. Life is different there. The night he left, Beatrice hugged him tightly. She didn't cry in front of him. She gave him her blessing, a folded bill, and a scapular that had belonged to her mother. Don't forget where you come from, my son. And don't forget me. David nodded, but didn't answer. And with time, the calls became more and more spaced out. First every week, then every month, then only on birthdays, until the phone stopped ringing completely. Years later, someone in the neighborhood told her that David had settled down with a woman there, that he didn't speak much anymore, that he said his family lived far away. Beatrice didn't ask any more questions, just said, as long as he's okay, I'm at peace. But it wasn't true, because every December when the other sons at least stopped by to drop off a bag of cookies or an envelope with some money, she would watch the door until very late, hoping a miracle would come from the West Coast. And it never came. In the hospital, Beatrice opened her eyes. David, she murmured suddenly. Emily turned. What happened? I dreamed I saw him, but it wasn't him. It was like someone who wasn't from here anymore. Emily didn't understand immediately, but she remained silent. She knew Beatrice wasn't talking about his face, but about his soul. When he left, I thought it was out of necessity, but later I realized he also wanted to leave me, as if I were something that weighed him down. You did what you could, Emily said. Yes, but sometimes, even if you give everything, there are children who don't want to receive it. Emily took Beatrice's hand. There's still one left, right? Yes, Daniel. Do you want me to try again? Beatrice didn't answer right away, just looked at the ceiling as if doing sums with time. Then she nodded slowly. Yes, dear, try. Maybe this time he'll answer. Emily got up, took the phone, and left the room. But at that very moment, Daniel, somewhere in Philadelphia, had already seen the message hours ago, and the only thing in front of him was a glass of whiskey and an empty gaze. In some corner of Philadelphia, Daniel held his glass of whiskey, with clumsy fingers and moist eyes fixed on his cell phone screen. The nurse's message was still there, clear, direct, unadorned. Your mother is hospitalized. She's asking for you. He had already read it twice, but he hadn't replied. Outside the bar, the sky was cloudy. A soft drizzle was falling on the parked cars. Inside, the music kept playing, muffled by the haze of alcohol and conscience. Daniel raised the glass and emptied it in one gulp. He closed his eyes tightly. In his mind, unable to stop it, an image he had been burying for years formed. The night of his 15th birthday. It was a Thursday, and it was cold. Beatrice had spent the entire day cooking on an old stove with a single burner. She hadn't been able to have a party, no music, no balloons, no guests. She had only one goal, to get a cake. For weeks, She had asked about prices at the bakeries in Lancaster. They all seemed impossible. The one Daniel wanted had 3 layers with strawberries and meringue, one of those he had seen in the display windows when he went with Beatrice on errands. "It's not necessary, Mom," he told her one day. "It's okay if there's no cake." But Beatrice had already decided. He wouldn't have a big party or expensive gifts, but he would have his cake, the best she could afford. And to get it, she sold the only radio she had at home, a small, square device she used every night to keep her company while she sewed. She had bought it with great effort years before, second-hand, and it was the only thing that played music in the house. The day before his birthday, Beatrice went to the flea market and offered it to an old man who sold tools. He didn't give her much, but it was enough to order the cake Daniel had described. When the day came, she hid it in the closet on top of a shoebox. She cooked rice, beef stew, and fresh tortillas. She ironed the only shirt he had without patches, and as evening fell, she called him. "Come, my love, close your eyes." Daniel obeyed, and when he opened them, there was the 3-layer cake, fresh strawberries on top, and meringue as white as a cloud. "Mom," he said, both surprised and with a broken voice. "Happy birthday, my life." Daniel didn't ask how she got it, just threw himself into her arms and hugged her tightly. Beatrice felt the world stop at that moment, that everything had been worth it. But that same night, while everyone slept, she sat alone to sew in silence. And it was there, in front of the silent machine, that the absence of music weighed on her, because the silence was what hurt the most. Back in the present, in that dimly lit bar that smelled of old things, Daniel put down his cell phone, left it on the table, and clenched his teeth. He closed his eyes, slammed his palm on the wood. "Don't mess with me, Mom, not now." But it wasn't anger at her. It was anger at himself. Because he knew, deep down, that he was the only one of his brothers who still had something inside. Something that hurt. Something that wouldn't let him live in peace. In the hospital, Beatrice woke up in the middle of the night. She was thirsty. Emily was sleeping in a chair near the wall. The dim light cast long shadows on the floor. The distant noise of monitors and empty hallways filled the air with an unsettling calm. She looked around. No one, just her. And that silence she already knew, like the one from that night after the cake. She closed her eyes and thought of Daniel, of his hugs, of his drawings on the wall, of his "I love you," Mom written with crayons, of how he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world who mattered. And for the first time since she had fallen in her kitchen, Beatrice let out a sob. Daniel. Not as a complaint, but as a silent plea. Like someone who knows that if anyone can still come, it's him. At dawn, Emily entered the room again with fresh coffee. "Good morning, Beatrice. How are you feeling?" Like a door that no one has knocked on in a long time. Emily smiled softly and sat beside her. "Do you want us to try with Daniel again?" Beatrice shook her head. "Not anymore. If he wants to come, he'll know how to find me." Meanwhile, on 4th Street North, in a rented room behind a grocery store, Daniel got out of bed with wrinkled clothes and a throbbing head. He walked to the sink. He splashed water on his face, looked at his reflection. "You're starting to look like him," he said in a low voice. He was referring to his father, the same one who left them when he was a baby. The same one Beatrice always told him he shouldn't be like. "You're going to be different," she would say. "You're not going to leave, you're not going to fail." But there he was, 43 years old, alone with his soul in pieces and a cell phone on the bed that kept showing him the message he still hadn't answered. The news spread slowly through the hospital corridors, like things no one wants to say out loud, but are known through glances, silences, the way nurses begin to treat one patient differently from the others. Beatrice no longer had visitors, but she wasn't just another patient in a bed either, at least not for those who had been watching her for weeks wake up without strength, fall asleep in silence, and look out the window as if searching for a sign. It was on Thursday afternoon when the head nurse asked, "Does this patient have anyone?" And the one who answered wasn't Emily, but another nurse, Jessica, who said, "She has 5 sons, but none of them have come." There was a brief silence. Then, a young doctor murmured, "5. "Yes, 5, said Emily, who was just leaving Beatrice's room at that moment. "But so far, they've all said the same thing, that they can't. The doctor crossed her arms with an expression between anger and sadness. Well, if they don't know her, let someone who does come. That night, Emily went down to the hospital cafeteria and, without asking permission, dialed a number handwritten on an old piece of paper that Beatrice kept in her bag. It was Mrs. Margaret's number. "Hello, Mrs. Margaret. I'm Beatrice's nurse, the one at the hospital." "Oh, miss, how is my neighbor? Is she better?" "She's still delicate, but conscious, and I think she needs to see a familiar face. Do you think you could come tomorrow?" On the other end of the line, there was no pause. "Tell me what time. I'll get ready and go." Mrs. Margaret arrived the next day with a small shopping bag and a hand-knitted sweater. Her hair was tied up, she wore a blue skirt, and her eyes were full of memories. Upon entering the room, Beatrice recognized her immediately. "What are you doing here, woman?" "Well, I came to tell you what your sons haven't told you." "And what's that?" "That you're not alone." Beatrice pressed her lips together, then turned her face to hide a tear. "Don't cry, Beatrice," Margaret said, approaching. "If you only knew all the things they say about you back in the neighborhood." "What do they say?" "That you were the one who helped the most people, the one who did others' laundry but never stopped sending her kids to school, the one who sold pies and still donated bread to those who had none. That doesn't matter anymore. How can it not matter? You don't see it, but you left a mark. It's just that your sons didn't want to follow it." Beatrice closed her eyes tightly, then opened them again. "And you, Margaret? Do you think I failed?" "No, you gave too much. That was your only mistake. You thought that children give back just as you give, and that doesn't always happen." The two women stayed in silence for a long while. Outside, it was starting to rain. The drops hit the window gently. Margaret took an embroidered handkerchief out of her bag. "I brought this for you. You embroidered it about 20 years ago. You gave it to me when my husband died. You said, 'Cry here, but then put it away.'" Beatrice looked at it, caressed it with her trembling fingers. "It still smells like cinnamon," she whispered. "Like your house," Margaret replied. Later, upon leaving the hospital, Margaret walked slowly through the wet streets. She felt an emptiness in her chest that she didn't know how to fill. And as she passed by a grocery store, she had an idea. She went in, bought a new notebook, a blue ink pen, and an envelope. Then she went to the local radio station, where they broadcast a community program. She asked to speak with the host. "Do you remember Beatrice Miller, the one who sold bread in the mornings and pies on the corner by the church?" "Of course. The lady with the flowered shawl, right?" "That's her. She's in the hospital. No one has visited her. And I want people to know she's still here, that she hasn't left, that she's still breathing, even if her family doesn't remember anymore." The host looked at her intently. Margaret took out the embroidered handkerchief, spread it on the table, and placed the paper with Beatrice's name on top. "I'm asking you, please, to talk about her tonight. Mention her, say she was a good mother, even if her sons don't understand, because someone in this town has to remember her as she deserves." The host nodded, his heart in his throat. "We'll do it, Mrs. Margaret. We'll do it." That night, at 8 o'clock sharp, the radio played an old Johnny Cash song, and then, in a slow voice, the host said, "Tonight, we want to talk about a woman many of you know, although few have visited her lately. Her name is Beatrice Miller. She's admitted to the General Hospital, and although she has 5 sons, none have come." The host's voice paused for a second. Then he continued, "But this lady is not just anyone. This lady helped her community, raised her children alone, worked harder than most, and she deserves for Philadelphia not to forget her. If you know her, write, call, pray for her, because there are mothers who don't deserve to leave in silence." A neighbor's loyalty just turned a private tragedy into a public truth. Mrs. Margaret has just lit a fire across the airwaves. Now, the question is, will her sons feel the heat? In the hospital, Emily was listening on her cell phone. Beatrice was sleeping. But upon hearing the name Beatrice Miller, she opened her eyes, and something, for the first time in days, moved inside her chest. Something that wasn't pain, nor sadness, nor resignation. It was something else, something like hope. Daniel looked at his cell phone for the umpteenth time. The nurse's message was still there. It hadn't been deleted. It hadn't gone away. It seemed rather embedded in the screen, like a warning that wouldn't stop looking at him. He was sitting on the bed with the curtains closed and his shirt unbuttoned. Outside it was raining, and the room smelled of confinement, of a damp cloth, of hopelessness. He thought about calling, just calling, but his pride, the one that had hardened over the years and with the drinks, closed his fingers, numbed his arms, froze his soul. "She's probably fine," he murmured to himself. "She always recovers. That old woman is stronger than all of us put together." He fell silent, felt his throat tighten, and suddenly, like someone resisting himself, he threw the cell phone on the floor. The thud was dull, and the silence that followed, even more so. In the hospital, Beatrice was still awake. The host's words were still spinning in her head, as if someone else had finally seen her. Emily approached her with a folded blanket. "Would you like some water?" "Yes, thank you, dear." Emily helped her with the glass. Beatrice drank slowly, trembling. Then she leaned her back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling. "At what point did I stop being important?" Emily didn't answer. She knew the question wasn't for her. "I was a mom, a nurse, a teacher, a cook, a seamstress, a laundress. And still, it wasn't enough?" "It's not your fault, Beatrice." Beatrice looked at her tenderly. "I know it's not. But you still keep asking yourself, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong?" Meanwhile, Daniel was walking through the soaked streets aimlessly. He had partially bathed, with his shirt tucked into his pants, no belt, and his shoes untied. He was staggering slightly, not from the alcohol, but from the knot he carried inside. With every step, he remembered a different scene. Beatrice serving him soup, Beatrice bandaging his scraped knee, Beatrice waiting on a school bench in the rain. "I swear, Mom, I won't leave you alone," he heard himself say, but in the voice of the boy he once was, not the man who now doubted everything. He passed a flower shop, stopped. He looked at the roses. They were white, beautiful, like the ones his mother used to plant in recycled cans when they lived in the house in Lancaster. He reached into his pocket. He had 2 coins and a crumpled bill. He went in. He bought one. Just one. In the hospital, Emily was checking Beatrice's condition. Her pressure had dropped a bit. Her skin was paler. Still, her eyes had something different, as if she were waiting for something more than medicine, as if the soul also had its own treatment, and that treatment was for someone, even just one, to arrive. Emily left the room and went to the waiting area. She opened her cell phone and wrote to Daniel again. "She's awake. She asked about you today." She sent it, but there was no reply. Daniel, meanwhile, was sitting on the curb at the corner across from the hospital, the flower in his hands, his soul in pieces. He had walked there without thinking. He just walked, as if guided by something he couldn't explain. But now he didn't dare to go in. He watched the automatic doors open and close, people entering, leaving, running with papers, with IV bags, with fear, and him, rooted to the spot, with a lump in his throat and his heart beating as if it were about to explode. What if it's too late? What if she dies and doesn't even see me? What if she doesn't want to see me? The flower slipped from his fingers and fell to the ground. He didn't notice, didn't pick it up. A few feet away, Emily was leaving the hospital to buy tea. She saw him, recognized him. Not by his clothes, not by his face, but by the fallen flower and the lost look in his eyes, because no one looks like that except a son with guilt. She approached him slowly. "Are you Daniel?" He looked up. It took him a moment to react, then he nodded. "I'm your mom's nurse. She's inside. She's asking for you." Daniel swallowed, looked down. His eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can." "You can, but I don't know if she wants to see me." Emily looked him in the eyes. "You're her son. She wants to see you, even if she doesn't say it, even if she can't say it." Daniel stood up, picked up the flower, and took a deep breath. But just as they were about to enter, a code sounded over the hospital's loudspeaker, an emergency call. Emily tensed up. "Wait for me here." And she ran inside. Daniel stood there, flower in hand, and one thought in his mind. "Please, don't be late again." The emergency code that blared from the loudspeakers echoed like thunder in Daniel's heart. He stood frozen just outside the hospital doors. the flower still in his hand, as if life had stopped in that instant. Emily ran inside without looking back. Daniel didn't dare follow her. He only heard the echo of her fading footsteps and, inside him, that deep, primitive fear that is unlike any other. The fear of being too late. The fear of not being able to ask for forgiveness. He squeezed the flower tightly. The petals crunched between his fingers. In room 212, Beatrice's pressure had dropped sharply. Nurse Jessica was already by her side when Emily entered. The monitors were beeping. Her oxygen levels were falling. Emily approached and took her hand. "Beatrice, it's me, Emily. I'm here now." Beatrice opened her eyes slightly, breathing with difficulty, but still conscious. "Mom," she murmured. Emily leaned closer. What did she say? "My mom." Jessica pressed the medical call button. Emily wiped the sweat from her forehead. "Don't worry, ma'am. The doctor is on his way." But Beatrice didn't seem scared. Her eyes were half closed, looking at an invisible point on the ceiling, as if she were talking to someone who was no longer there. "Mom, almost there. I'm coming." Emily felt something tear inside her. "No, Beatrice, you're here. Stay with me." "Yes, your son is coming. He's right outside." Beatrice's lips moved slowly. "Daniel." "Yes, Daniel." "He came. He's here. Do you want me to call him?" Beatrice nodded faintly. And at that moment, the monitor beeped more slowly. Emily shot up like a bolt of lightning and ran out of the room. Daniel was still outside. He hadn't moved a single step. When he saw Emily running back towards him, he stood up immediately. "Is she alive?" "Yes, but she's fading. And she asked for you by name." Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran into the hospital. The flower fell to the ground again, forgotten. He ran up the stairs as if his life depended on it. Beatrice was still with her eyes closed, breathing with difficulty. When Daniel entered the room, he stopped when he saw her. His mother, small, fragile, but still there. He approached the bed. He took her hand. "Mom." Beatrice opened her eyes slowly, and upon seeing him, she smiled. A barely visible smile, but enough. "You took your time," she whispered. He lowered his head, kissed her fingers. "Forgive me. Forgive me for everything. For every silence, for every night I didn't look for you, for not answering, for thinking there was time." Beatrice didn't reply, just looked at him. And in her eyes there was something Daniel didn't remember ever seeing before. Peace. And then, like a whisper from the past, Beatrice remembered a distant night, long before they all left. It was a December morning. It was raining outside. The cold seeped through the cracks in the window. Daniel, who was then only 9 years old, had had a nightmare. He ran to his mother's bed, his bare feet trembling. "Mom, can I sleep with you?" Beatrice opened her arms without saying a word. She tucked him in with the same blanket she had used for years, mended at the corners. And as he settled next to her chest, she caressed his hair. "It's over, my love. You're here now. And if you die one day, Mom?" She laughed softly. "Why do you say that? Because you're old? And it scares me." Beatrice held him tight. "I'm not going anywhere yet. And when I do, it will be slowly, so it doesn't hurt. Will you wait for me always?" Daniel was still there, his head pressed against her hand, crying like a child. "Don't go, Mom. Not yet." And Beatrice, with a voice fainter than ever, just said, "I've waited for you. Now you stay a little while." And she closed her eyes, but this time she didn't fall asleep. Daniel didn't move. He remained leaning over the bed, his forehead brushing against his mother's still warm hand. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't sleeping. He couldn't. His chest rose and fell with difficulty, as if each breath cost an apology. Emily entered minutes later, slower than ever. The room was silent. Only the soft, constant, serene beep of the monitor broke the air. "Is she still stable?" he asked without moving. "Yes, for now. What if she doesn't wake up tomorrow?" Emily didn't answer right away. She approached and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. She already did it once. No, maybe she'll do it again. He nodded, but without conviction. Everything hurts, but what hurts more is knowing she forgave me with her eyes without me saying anything. That kills me more than the silence. Emily bent down and opened the drawer of the table next to the bed. She looked through some papers and pulled out a sealed envelope with the name Daniel written by hand. She wrote this a few days ago. She hadn't delivered it. She said it was in case you didn't come. Daniel took it with trembling hands, looked at it for a long time, didn't open it. She knew that we weren't going to come. She didn't say it, but she expected it. That's worse. Hours later, when Daniel had fallen asleep in the chair, Emily went to the staff desk, opened a folder she had kept under lock and key, and took out a small packet of folded papers in the same type of envelope. They were written in trembling black ink, one for each son. None asked for anything, none complained. They only spoke of memories, moments of silent gratitude. The one for Michael was brief. Thank you for being the first. You made me a mother. Even though you don't call me anymore, I will always hear you in my memory. When you said Mom for the first time. The one for Robert had 2 pages. You were the most temperamental, the one who made me laugh the most and worried me the most. I don't blame you, I just think of you. The one for David was the saddest. I always wanted you to come back, not for money, for you. I never needed your dollars, only your hug. The one for Thomas had tight lines. I know you keep quiet more than you can, that you obey even though your heart wants the opposite. I hope one day you speak. I hope it's in time. And Daniel's, that one was still closed. Emily put everything away carefully. She didn't know if she should deliver them. Not yet. Something inside her told her it wasn't the time yet, that a mother's words should arrive when the son was ready to read them with an open heart, not just with his eyes. The next day, Beatrice was still asleep. The doctors kept her under constant observation. Her body was responding slowly. It wasn't a coma, but it was a state of disconnection, as if her soul needed to stay a little longer on the other side. Daniel didn't leave the hospital. He stayed in the room all day. Sometimes he would go into the room, talk to her softly, tell her stories from when he was a child, read the local newspaper ads aloud, as if that could bring her back. In the afternoon, Emily entered with a small notebook. "This is yours," she said, handing Daniel the notebook with flower drawings on the cover. He opened it. Inside were notes, dates, names, shopping lists, but also loose fragments, phrases for letters, incomplete verses, and a page that said, "If they ever forget you, write your own story. No one will tell it better than you." "She wrote that?" Daniel asked. "Yes. One morning I was on duty." Her body ached, but she didn't complain. She just asked me for a pen and said she had to write down what her soul couldn't hold. That night, for the first time, Daniel took out his phone and wrote a message to Michael, to David, to Thomas, to Robert. He told them their mother was alive, but he didn't know for how long. He just wrote that, and then sent the photos of the envelope, the letters, the words no one had wanted to receive, but which now weighed like lead. One by one, they began to reply. Some with a simple "I'm coming," others with "I don't know what to say," and one, only one, with "Can you read it to me? I don't dare open it myself." Daniel turned off his cell phone, went back to his mother's bed, took her hand, and for the first time in decades, said in a low voice, "Mom, I'm here. Not just me. We're coming back one by one, like before, like at home." And without anyone noticing, a tear slid down Beatrice's cheek, still asleep. It wasn't of pain. It was something deeper, as if from some corner of her consciousness, she knew that this time they were really coming. A mother's heart knows, even in the deepest sleep. Daniel's message, armed with his mother's loving words, has finally broken through decades of excuses. They are coming home. But what will this long overdue reunion look like? And will they arrive in time? The hospital lights were beginning to dim in the hallways. The silence of the early morning enveloped everything with a heavy, dense calm. Only the murmurs of nurses changing shifts and the constant hum of monitors marking the boundary between life and the end remained. Emily hadn't left. Although her shift had ended over an hour ago, she remained seated on the edge of the desk, reviewing Beatrice's records under the pretext of updating her file. But the truth was different. She couldn't leave. Not yet. She felt with a certainty she didn't know where it came from that Beatrice needed her beyond her duty as a nurse. She opened her backpack without making a sound. She took out a sweet roll wrapped in a floral napkin. She had bought it that morning at the market, one of those with pink sugar on top, like the ones her grandmother used to give her as a child. She entered the room slowly. Beatrice was still asleep. Her breathing was soft, but present. Her face had lost some of its color, but her eyelids moved slightly, as if she were still dreaming of something or someone. Daniel was asleep beside her, hunched in the chair with his neck twisted and one hand on the sheet. Emily watched him for a few seconds with a mixture of compassion and anger. Compassion for having arrived, anger for having taken so long. She left the sweet roll on the small table next to the bed without making a noise. Then she took a stool and sat down. 10 minutes passed. Then Beatrice opened her eyes. Slow, deep. "Where am I?" she murmured. Emily sat up carefully. "Here, Beatrice, in the hospital. You're with me and with your son." She turned her head, saw Daniel asleep, a trickle of drool at the corner of his mouth, his hair messy, his eyes closed like those of an exhausted child. "He came?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "He came and he hasn't left since he arrived. He didn't move all night." Beatrice closed her eyes for a moment. "I thought he would only come when I could no longer see him. Sometimes sons take a while, but they arrive. And the others?" Emily hesitated. One replied, "Thomas. He said he'll try to come." And Michael read the letter. Beatrice looked down. "Then I have nothing left to say to him." Emily took out the floral notebook that Beatrice had used days before. "Do you remember this?" Beatrice took it with trembling hands. She ran her fingers over the cover as one caresses an old wound. "Yes, I wrote things I never said because a mother always keeps something, even if she's not asked to. And would you like to read it out loud?" Beatrice looked at her tenderly. "What for, if no one is listening anymore?" "I am." Beatrice opened the notebook, found a particular page, and began to read slowly. "A mother is not measured by the children she had, but by the time she swallowed her tears so they could eat in peace. A mother doesn't expect a reward, but she doesn't forget either." She closed the notebook. Her eyes were moist. "I wrote it for myself because it hurt in silence." Emily took her hand, squeezed it without speaking. Beatrice looked at Daniel, still asleep. "When he was a boy, he would hide in the kitchen to steal sweet rolls. He thought I didn't see him, but I always saved an extra one for him." Emily smiled. "Then this," she said, pointing to the roll, "is an old debt I've come to pay." Beatrice laughed softly, took the roll, bit into it with difficulty, and closed her eyes with a sigh. "It tastes like home." Minutes later, Daniel woke up, rubbed his eyes, and approached the bed. He saw Beatrice awake and swallowed. "Mom." She looked at him. "You came." He didn't know what to say. He just sat down and hugged her carefully, afraid of breaking her. "I'm sorry." "You don't owe me anything," she replied. "But if you give me some time, I'll accept a little company. I'm not leaving. That's what you said when you were 10. Do you remember?" Daniel laughed through his tears. "Yes, Mom. And now I mean it." Beatrice closed her eyes. She smiled. But it wasn't the smile of someone resting. It was that of someone finally letting go of the weight of so many years. "Then, I'm not missing anything anymore." Emily, from the doorway, watched them, and something in her chest told her that this wasn't the end. It was something more important, the beginning of what should have always been. The early morning was long. The hospital clock read 3:47 a.m. when Emily re-entered the room with a clean blanket to cover Beatrice. Daniel had fallen asleep again in the chair, his arms crossed and his head resting against the wall. The silence was so thick that not even the hallways dared to break it. Beatrice was sleeping. She was breathing with an irregular rhythm. The monitor remained stable, although her body temperature had risen slightly. Emily approached, placed her hand on the old woman's forehead, and found it damp, slightly agitated. "It's starting again," she whispered to herself. "It's coming." Because she had noticed it before. Every time the fever rose, Beatrice detached from reality. She went to another place, another time. And this time was no different. In her mind, Beatrice wasn't in a bed. She was standing, barefoot, in the yard of her old house in Lancaster. The sun was beating down hard. She felt the warm earth under her feet and heard the familiar sound of the corn grinder on the corner. The pies were in the oven, the stove was on, and in the background, the shouts of her children. "Mom!" Michael pushed me. "Robert, he won't let me play." David broke my notebook. Daniel wet his pants. And in the middle of them all, she, Beatrice, with her shawl askew, a stained apron, her hands full of dough, and her heart full of life. "All 5 of you, be quiet. Don't be rude." "I'm working with a hot stove," she would yell, but with a smile hidden in her voice, because deep down, she loved that chaos. It was the sound of a living home, the noise that reminded her that even though she had nothing, she had everything. In the dream, she turned around and saw little Daniel hiding behind the old wardrobe they used as a closet. He was crying. He was trembling, holding a crumpled drawing in his hand. She approached. "What happened, son?" "They didn't like my drawing. They laughed." Beatrice hugged him. "It doesn't matter if they laughed. I'm going to hang it on the wall because it's beautiful." "Really?" "Really." And in the dream, Beatrice saw the wall covered with drawings and the names of her sons written in crayon. 1 red, 1 green, 1 blue, 1 black, 1 purple. And under all of them, a sign. Mom's house. Beatrice tossed in her bed. She mumbled things Daniel couldn't understand, words from another time. Stew. Bread. Daniel, don't cry. Michael, be quiet. Robert, don't climb up there. Emily held her hand. She's dreaming, but she's home. Don't interrupt her. Home, repeated Daniel, waking up. What did she say? That they are all in the yard. Daniel swallowed. It hurt because he also remembered that yard, where they played with cardboard boxes as if they were castles, where they lined up for their mother to cut their hair with old scissors, where once they all got the flu, and Beatrice stayed up for 3 straight nights to care for all 5. What if she's saying goodbye? Daniel asked. Emily didn't answer. Minutes later, Beatrice opened her eyes. Slow, pained. She looked at Daniel, then at Emily, and with a thread of a voice asked, "Where are they?" "Here, Mom." "It's me," said Daniel, taking her hand. "They're all here. Some are missing, but they're coming." Beatrice nodded, but she didn't seem convinced. "And the tree?" "What tree?" "The one in the yard, the one I planted with you. Does it still give shade?" Daniel didn't know what to answer. He had completely forgotten about that tree. A small one that Beatrice had planted when David turned 6. An orange tree. "Yes, Mom. It's still there, really big." She smiled, satisfied. "Then I'm going to sleep a little." "Yes. Yes. Sleep peacefully." But when she closed her eyes this time, something in her expression changed. It was no longer fever, no longer delirium. It was a calm that was heavy, a surrender. Emily noticed it, touched her wrist. There was still a pulse, but the rhythm was slow, unstable. "Let me know if anything changes," she told Daniel. He nodded, but he couldn't speak. He could only watch his mother sleep and feel that time was starting to count backward. Meanwhile, on a plane landing in New York City, David turned on his cell phone and saw the latest messages from the brothers' group chat. His heart was beating fast. The ticket to Philadelphia was already in his pocket, and inside him, a single phrase was spinning in his head. "It still gives shade." The host's clock read 5:58 p.m. when the red light in the studio came on. The technician behind the glass gave a thumbs up, and he adjusted his headphones, cleared his throat, and looked at a folded sheet of paper he had just received 15 minutes earlier, handwritten in large, firm letters. On the air in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, dear listeners. Today, I'm not here to give you weather reports, or promotions, or birthdays. Today, I'm here with something different, something urgent. On the other side of the microphone, the housewives of Philadelphia turned down the volume on their frying pans. The grandfathers listening on their porches stopped watching the street. The people driving down Broad Street turned up the volume. I want to tell you a story, a true story. It's about a woman you may know. Her name is Beatrice Miller. In the hospital, Emily turned on the radio from her cell phone. Daniel was sitting next to his mother's bed with a somber face. Beatrice was still asleep, but she was breathing a little more calmly. Emily turned up the volume just enough. Beatrice is not just any patient. She's a mother, a woman who raised 5 sons alone. She did laundry for the neighborhood, sold pies, taught neighborhood children to read, and yet today she is alone in a bed, without visitors, without hugs, without the presence of those sons for whom she fought so hard. Daniel lifted his head upon hearing his name from someone else's mouth. 5 men, 5 adults, all alive, but none here. And then the host's tone changed. It became slower, deeper. Mrs. Miller didn't ask for anything, not charity, not tributes. She just asked in a soft voice, "Where are they?" Silence in the booth, silence in the city. And then, I don't know about you, dear listener, but that breaks my heart. And if you knew her, if you ever bought a pie from her, if you ever saw that lady sweep her sidewalk with a stooped back and her head held high, today I ask you for something. Call her, write to her, pray for her, or simply don't forget her name, because there are people who shouldn't leave this world without knowing that they did leave a mark. Emily looked at Daniel. He had his eyes glued to the radio. His breathing had quickened, and tears were silently streaming down his face. He said nothing, just held his mother's hand tighter. Miles away, in Robert's house, his wife was coming out of the bathroom when she found him standing motionless in front of the stereo. "What are you listening to?" "Mom. They're talking about her on the radio." She looked at him in silence, and for the first time in years, she saw that Robert didn't have that shield of anger he used to use for everything. Now he was broken, bare, remembering. In Chicago, David was on the bus that would take him to Philadelphia when a lady asked him to turn down the volume on his phone. He apologized, but didn't turn it off. He kept listening to the replay of the radio program that someone had uploaded to social media. "Where are they?" she had asked. And David felt that she was his mother, but also many others. All those women who gave more than they received, who were forgotten by those they cared for the most. In the hospital, room 212 was filled with a strange peace. Beatrice was still asleep, but her face had less tension. Emily walked into the hallway and met a nurse on duty. "Do you know how many calls we've received from the public in the last hour?" "Yes, more than 30. They want to know if they can send flowers, letters, sweets, even blankets." One lady said she was going to bring a small altar with candles. Another asked if she could come to see her and pray a rosary. Emily leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. This is what she deserved from the beginning. And her sons? One is here, and the others are on their way. The nurse looked at her, surprised. "They're coming?" "Yes," Emily replied. "It's not out of obligation anymore. It's because the silence started screaming at them from within." That night, at the hospital entrance, a gray minivan parked slowly. Thomas got out of the passenger seat, nervous, with a grocery bag in his hand. Inside were pumpkin bread, a juice box, and a folded letter. His sister-in-law was with him, not his wife, because his wife didn't want to go. But he went anyway, and on his face, you could see that he wasn't going to run away this time. On the second floor, Michael was already sitting by the hallway window, waiting for his turn to go in. David was still on his way. And Beatrice was still sleeping. But the monitor no longer sounded so unstable, as if her body had finally decided to stay a little longer, just a little, to give them time. That night, in a middle-class apartment south of New York City, Michael locked himself in his study, with the door closed and the radio still on, even though the host had moved on to another topic. Outside, in the kitchen, his wife Linda was washing the dishes without hurry, while their 2 teenage children played video games in their rooms, as if the world were completely normal. But inside that room, nothing was right. Michael had a crumpled piece of paper on his desk. He had folded it 4 times and had been carrying it in his pants pocket for days. It was his mother's letter, the one Emily had sent him a photo of, and which he, after reading it just once, hadn't dared to delete. He opened it again. The letters were crooked but clear. "Michael, you were the first to call me Mom. Because of you, I learned what it was to not sleep, not eat, not have, and still smile. I always thought you would take care of me when I could no longer walk on my own. But then I understood that not all sons love the same. I don't blame you for anything, but I'm still waiting for you." He read it completely again, and this time it hurt like never before, because for years, Michael had carried the image of the proper son, the one who studied, the one who worked, the one who paid for things, the one who said, "I've done my part." But now that his mother was on the verge of leaving, he understood that doing his part wasn't enough, that a mother's heart isn't filled with bank deposits, but with presence. The next day, he asked for the day off from the bank. He gave no explanations, just said he had a personal matter in Philadelphia. His boss raised his eyebrows in surprise. Michael never asked for days off. Never. He took an early bus, traveled in silence, looked out the window the whole way. He carried a paper bag with a jar of hand cream, an old book his mother had given him when he was a child, and a drawing he found in his memory box of him with a superhero cape made of aluminum foil and her laughing behind him. He had completely forgotten about it. Now he didn't understand how. Upon arriving at the hospital, he went straight to the second floor. He didn't look for nurses, didn't ask for permission, just walked down the hallway with his eyes fixed on the door of room 212. When he opened it, he found Daniel asleep in the same chair as always. Beatrice, as so many times before, was resting with her eyes closed, but breathing. Emily was standing by the window, writing on a sheet. Michael said nothing, entered, took off his jacket, and sat in front of his mother. Emily watched him calmly. She knew who he was, but she waited for him to speak. "Has she asked for me?" Emily nodded. Not with words, but with her eyes. Michael looked down, squeezed the jar of cream in his hand. "Can I put it on her?" "Of course." He approached, took one of his mother's hands, dry, fragile, and began to apply the cream slowly, respectfully, with the same gentleness she used to treat his scraped knees when he fell on the street. "Forgive me, Mom, for being so close and so far at the same time." Beatrice didn't open her eyes, but her hand moved slightly, a gentle squeeze, just enough for him to know she had heard. At the same time, at the bus station, David was getting off the bus with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He had no suitcase, no gifts, no excuses, only the weight of a long absence and a lump in his throat that had been choking him since he set foot in Pennsylvania. He hailed a taxi, got in, gave the hospital's address in a hoarse voice. "Visiting someone?" the driver asked, trying to make conversation. "My mother. Been a while since you've seen her?" David looked out the window, didn't answer. It wasn't necessary. Meanwhile, in room 212, Michael had finished applying the cream. Emily left to give them space. Daniel was still asleep, and Beatrice was breathing more calmly. Michael leaned over the bed, kissed her forehead. "I'm here now, Mom. I'm with you, and this time I'm staying." At that moment, there was a soft knock on the door. Emily peeked her head in, and behind her, with a tired but determined face, was David. "Can I come in?" Michael looked at him. They were both silent. They didn't hug. They didn't blame each other. They just looked at each other like two sons who finally understood the price of being late. David entered, approached. Beatrice was still asleep. "Hey, boss," he said, stroking her hair. "I'm here." And then, for the first time in many years, 3 of Beatrice's 5 sons were in the same room. But 2 were still missing, and time, though it had granted a truce, did not forgive forever. The afternoon wore on, and the second-floor hallway of the hospital filled with a murmur that came not from voices, but from presences. Michael, David, and Daniel remained silent, all 3 in the same room for the first time in decades. No one spoke of what had separated them, nor of what had brought them back. But between the sighs, the glances, and the clumsy movements, it was felt. They all knew they were there for the same reason, for not having been there before. Emily entered with her notepad in hand, greeted them with a gesture, and went straight to check Beatrice's vital signs. They were stable, but low. Her body was still fighting. "How is she?" David asked. "She's holding on, but we don't know for how much longer. She needs rest and company. That helps." Daniel looked at his mother as if he wanted to memorize every line on her face. Michael was sitting further back, his gaze on the floor. David, standing with his hands crossed behind his back, breathed through his mouth as if the air in the room were heavier than usual. And the others? Emily asked. Robert? Thomas. Thomas said he was coming, Michael said without looking up. He'll be here today. Robert, Daniel murmured. Robert isn't answering. Robert doesn't know what to say, David corrected. He never knew how to apologize without raising his voice. In the Kensington neighborhood, Robert was sitting in his dining room with an open beer and a blanket over his legs. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. On the table, his cell phone vibrated every so often with messages from the brothers' group chat, but he didn't read them. He knew they were there. He knew Beatrice was still alive. He knew everything, but he didn't move. Deep down, it wasn't out of pride, it was out of fear. Fear of arriving and his mother not wanting to see him. What if she tells me she doesn't love me anymore? He said in a low voice, as if someone could hear him. His wife, from the kitchen, watched him without saying anything. Why don't you go, Robert? She asked in a soft tone, without reproach. Because I was the one who gave the most, wasn't I? I paid for the foot surgery. I took her to the ER when no one else would. I lent her money for the gas. Yes, but none of that matters. If she really needed you, and you hung up on her. He didn't answer. She approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. It doesn't matter what you gave. It matters how you left. Robert lowered his head. In the hospital, Beatrice woke up for a few minutes. She looked around with half-open eyes, recognized the 3 sons who were with her. She didn't say much, just asked for water. Emily helped her drink. Then, in a low voice, she asked, "And the others?" "They're coming, Mom," David said. "Really, I promise." "And Daniel?" she asked, not realizing he was right there. "I'm here, Mom. I'm not leaving anymore." Beatrice nodded, closed her eyes. "I don't care if they come anymore. With the 3 of you, I'm at peace." Daniel swallowed his tears. Michael got up and adjusted her sheet. David kissed her forehead, and then the silence became tender. For the first time, it didn't hurt. That night, around 10 p.m., Thomas arrived at the hospital with a bag of bread and an old jacket in his hand. He entered with his head down. Emily met him at the entrance of the room. She's awake at times. If you want to go in, speak softly. Thomas entered with his eyes full of something that wasn't sadness, but shame. Upon seeing his brothers, he stopped. "Hello." David was the first to stand up. "Hello." Daniel gave him a nod. Michael simply looked at him. Beatrice opened her eyes just then. She saw him. "Thomas." "I'm here, Mom." She smiled. "And your wife?" "She didn't come. Better." Thomas laughed softly. "I brought you bread, the kind I like, with sesame seeds." "Then you do love me." Thomas approached, gave her a kiss on the cheek, and stayed by her side. It was almost midnight when, in a taxi, Robert asked the driver to slow down as they reached the hospital street. He looked at the building as if from an abyss. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I just don't know if they'll let me in." The taxi driver looked at him in the mirror. "It's you," he said. "Yes. Then don't go in with fear. Go in with your heart." Robert paid, got out, stood in front of the entrance, and took the first step. The night in the hospital progressed slowly. The second-floor hallway was almost completely dark. Only the security lights remained on, casting long shadows that slid along the walls as if they too were waiting. In room 212, the air seemed suspended. The 4 brothers were there. Michael sat by the window with his head down. David stood with his arms crossed over his chest. Thomas leaned against the wall, still holding the bag of bread he didn't dare open. And Daniel, the only one who remained by Beatrice's bed, held her hand with a care that was no longer rushed or guilty, only love. Beatrice was sleeping deeply. Her breathing was light, paused. There was no fever, no visible pain, but her body was exhausted. And in the silence of her rest, each of her sons seemed to face an invisible mirror, his reflection as a son and what they had failed to be. At 2:40, 3 inches the morning, the door to the room opened slowly. All 4 turned at the same time. It was Robert. He wore an old, wrinkled shirt and worn-out jeans. His hair was messy and his eyes were red, as if he had cried on the way. In his hand, a small plastic bag with one of his mother's sweaters. The one she had given him years ago, and that he had kept, without admitting it, in a drawer, never touching it, until tonight. No one said anything. Robert entered, took one step, then another, and when he was in front of the bed, he dropped the sweater on the chair and said, almost in a whisper, "Mom, I'm here." The final son has arrived. All 5 of them, pulled back not by love, but by guilt and shame, are finally in the same room. They think the hard part is over, but they have no idea what Beatrice has already set in motion. His brothers watched him. None of them moved, no one spoke, but something in the atmosphere changed. As if the air became lighter, as if Beatrice's heart, still asleep, knew that finally they were all there. Emily appeared a few minutes later. She was on the night shift, but had stopped by the room just to make sure everything was okay. She stopped short when she saw them all. 5 men, 5 sons, 5 bodies that for years had lived, scattered, broken, distant, and now, finally, were in the same space without the need for words. "Are you all here?" Emily asked in a low voice. "Yes," Daniel replied. "We are. And Beatrice is still asleep, but I think she knows." Emily approached, touched the patient's forehead, then checked the monitor. Everything was stable, slow, but firm. "She's still fighting, and with you all here, maybe she'll want to do it a little longer." Robert sat at the foot of the bed, looked at his mother, and covered his face with his hands. "I told her I couldn't. I told her I didn't have time, that I had already done my part. And here you are," David said. "That's what matters. Do you think she'll forgive me?" "She already has," Daniel answered without looking back. "Mom doesn't expect you to say the right thing, just for you to be here." The clock struck 3:17 when Beatrice opened her eyes for the first time since the previous afternoon. She barely moved her head, saw shadows, familiar figures. It took her a few seconds to focus, but one by one, she recognized them. Robert. He stood up immediately. "Yes, Mom, it's me. I'm here, and the others are here too. We all came." Beatrice smiled. "Then, I am complete." She tried to sit up, but Emily gently stopped her. "Don't strain yourself. Just breathe. They're here now. And Margaret? She's resting, but she's coming early tomorrow." Beatrice looked at Daniel. "Did you eat?" He laughed through tears. "Yes, Mom, I'm not skinny anymore." She closed her eyes again, but without pain. This time, with relief. A few hours later, as the sun was just beginning to filter its light through the hallway windows, Beatrice woke up again with more strength. She was able to sit up a little, drink water, smile longer, and then she said, "I want to talk." "About what?" Emily asked. "About my house, my will, what I want to leave." All the sons looked at each other. The tension settled back into the room like a dense cloud. Beatrice took a deep breath. "I have something that no one else knows, and I want to say it now, while I can, because I don't want to leave any loose ends or misunderstandings." Emily approached with a notebook. "Do you want to write it down?" "No. I want to say it out loud. Let everyone hear." Thomas straightened up in his chair. Robert crossed his arms. David closed his eyes. Michael adjusted his back. Daniel simply stayed by his mother's side. "Whatever you say, we'll respect it, Mom," Daniel said. Beatrice looked at them all and, with a voice firmer than expected, said, "I am not leaving you the house." The silence was immediate, heavy, painful, and just at that moment, the monitor made a slight jump in rhythm. The silence that followed those 5 words was so profound that the heart monitor seemed to echo louder than before. "I am not leaving you the house." Beatrice had pronounced them calmly, without a tremor, without resentment, only with the clarity that sometimes comes when there is nothing left to lose, and only the truth matters. Daniel was the first to react. He didn't speak, but he lowered his head. Not out of shame, but because he knew, without anyone explaining it, that his mother was not speaking from anger, but from decision. Michael, from the window, turned slowly. He looked uncomfortable, but not surprised. He pressed his lips together, took a deep breath, and crossed his arms. David froze. He didn't even blink, as if he needed a few seconds to process what he had just heard. And Thomas, sitting at the foot of the bed, swallowed and looked at the others as if hoping someone would say it was a joke. But no one said anything. Beatrice looked at them one by one, no longer with the face of a mother who waits, but with that of a woman who has lived too much. Don't misunderstand me. It's not revenge, it's justice. Who are you going to leave it to then? Robert asked, his voice lower than ever. Beatrice turned her head towards the door. Emily stood there, motionless. To her, Beatrice said. They all turned at the same time. Emily felt the sharp blow of those gazes in her chest. She wanted to speak, to say no, that it wasn't her place, that she had only done what she was supposed to do. But Beatrice raised a hand, as if asking her to let her continue. She took care of me when no one else would. She cleaned me, she hugged me, she listened to me, and she owed me nothing. She didn't have to do it. She wasn't my blood, but she treated me with more dignity than you did. No one interrupted her. No one dared. What did she give you that we didn't? David finally said. Beatrice took a few seconds to answer. Time. Thomas lowered his gaze. Robert leaned against the wall. Michael wiped away a tear without anyone noticing. Daniel, on the other hand, moved closer to the bed and took her hand. It's okay, Mom. It's okay. Beatrice smiled at him tenderly. You came back. You looked me in the eyes. That's enough. But I don't want this house to become a fight between you when I'm gone. I don't want to see you divided over something you didn't know how to value when I was alive. Did you already make the will? Michael asked. Yes, it's signed. Notarized. I kept it in an envelope with Emily. As soon as I fall asleep for good, she'll know what to do with it. Emily wanted to say something, but Beatrice stopped her with a look. Don't say anything, dear. It's not a favor. It's a promise. I decided this alone, with a clear head, and no one pressured me. No one manipulated me. No one offered me anything. She was just there, as a child should be, even if not born of you. For a long time, no one spoke. The room was filled with thoughts, with untold stories, with memories that now became heavy. Then Beatrice settled back on her pillow, closed her eyes for a moment. Can I rest a little? I'm tired. Of course, Mom, Daniel said. Should we stay? David asked. Yes, stay, but without fighting. They all nodded. Emily adjusted the sheet and turned off the lamp, leaving only the light from the hallway filtering through the ajar door. Beatrice fell asleep. In the hallway, the 5 brothers went out one by one. No one spoke. Michael stopped next to Emily. Did you know from the beginning? She asked me to a few days ago. She told me not to say anything until you were all here. Why you? Robert asked. Emily looked at him firmly. Because I didn't wait for her to ask me. That night, while they took turns sleeping in the hallway chairs, Mrs. Margaret arrived. She was carrying a bag with clean clothes, a package of animal crackers, and a rosary. Can I go in to see her? She asked Emily. Of course, but she's asleep. It doesn't matter. I just need to see her. She entered the room silently, sat by the side of the bed, stroked Beatrice's hair, and began to pray in a low voice. I told you, my friend. They were going to come back late, but they came. Now all that's left is for time not to charge them too dearly. Margaret stayed there, her fingers on the rosary beads, and in her gaze was something that none of the sons had yet shown. Complete faith. But outside, there was still a whole night left, and the dawn did not promise mercy. Dawn arrived with a gray, colorless sky, the kind of light that neither warms nor promises. Outside the hospital, the wind blew lightly but constantly, and the trees seemed to bow as if they also knew that inside, something important was about to happen. In room 212, the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer a place of waiting, but of resignation. Beatrice, although she had woken up for moments during the night, did not speak again. She slept with a soft expression, but with a different kind of paleness, as if her body were speaking to her sons without words. This is ending. Emily checked the clinical records without making a sound, measured the oxygen, adjusted the IV, listened to the slow beats of the monitor. Margaret was still sitting by the headboard, praying in a low voice. No one else spoke. Robert was standing in a corner. He looked at his mother with a mixture of tenderness and fear. David had fallen asleep in a chair with his arms crossed over his chest. Michael stood with his back to everyone, looking out the window as if searching for an answer outside that didn't exist. Thomas was slowly eating a cold piece of bread, just to do something with his hands. Daniel held Beatrice's hand, caressing it with his thumbs. No one knew what to do with so much silence, until Beatrice took a deep breath, a long, deep sigh, and opened her eyes. "What time is it?" she asked, barely audible. 6:15, Mom, Daniel replied, moving closer. "Are they gone?" "No, we're all here. We haven't left." She nodded slowly, then looked around. "One by one. I'm cold." Emily took a thicker blanket and placed it over her chest. "Thank you, dear," Beatrice whispered. "You're welcome, Beatrice. Would you like some water?" "No, I just want to talk one last time." The brothers looked at each other, drew closer, formed a semicircle around the bed without needing to agree. No one protested, no one interrupted. Beatrice took a breath, closed her eyes for a few seconds, and then opened them again. "I had 5 sons. I raised them with my bare hands, with a broken body, with a tired soul. I gave more than I had, and still, I grew old alone." None of the 5 answered. The words fell like stones, soft but heavy. "I didn't call you to complain. I didn't keep you waiting, hoping you would give it all back. But when I got sick, I wanted to know if you still remembered me, if you still knew that I existed." "We knew, Mom," David said. "We just didn't know how to come back." "It's never too late to come back," she replied, "but it is too late to stay." Beatrice looked up and fixed her gaze on Emily. "Do you have the envelope?" Emily nodded. She walked to her bag, took out a sealed manila envelope with the name Beatrice Miller written in thick marker. "Can I read it now?" "No, not yet. Wait until the end." Emily returned to her place without another word. Beatrice took a deep breath. She looked exhausted, but she kept talking. "To you, Michael, I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. You were my first hope and also the first to leave. But I thank you for coming." Even though it was late, Michael lowered his head. His lip trembled, but he didn't speak. "David, you were the quietest, the one who asked for the least, the one who left the most without saying a word. But here you are." "Thank you." David let out a sigh that sounded like an apology. "Thomas, it doesn't matter that you couldn't. You are here today, and that's worth more than 100 promises." "I'm sorry, Mom," he managed to say with a broken voice. "Robert, you were harsh. Yes, but you were also loyal, and fear made you late. But here you are. Nothing more is needed." Robert cried silently, without visible tears, but with his shoulders shaking. "And you, Daniel, you took care of me without being asked. You spoke to me without fear. You gave me your forgiveness without waiting for mine. Never forget that. I have loved you always, until after." Daniel leaned in and kissed her hand. He held it with both of his and closed his eyes. Beatrice sighed more deeply. This time her chest rose and fell with effort. Emily noted the change in blood pressure. The oxygenation was dropping, but she didn't interrupt. She knew this moment was theirs, not hers. And Beatrice knew it too. "When you bury me, I don't want expensive flowers. No bands, no big masses. I want silence, and for you to remember me as I was, not as someone who sat and waited, but as someone who always walked." The sons nodded in silence. "And I want you, after this, not to get lost again. Don't do it for me. Do it for yourselves." Beatrice closed her eyes, and for a moment they thought she had fallen asleep again. But she spoke again, more softly. "I was a mother, and I was a woman. I was a seamstress, a vendor, sick, strong. But more than anything, I was yours, and no one can take that away from me." An hour later, her vital signs began to drop slowly. Emily approached, checked the machines. There were no alarms. She just placed a hand on Beatrice's shoulder. "She's ready," she murmured. The brothers said nothing. But one by one, they approached their mother. They touched her face, her forehead, her hands. There was no hysteria, no screams, just a quiet, human, late, but sincere goodbye. Margaret took out her rosary, began to pray in a low voice, her eyes closed. Emily held the envelope in her hands, knowing she would soon have to open it. But at that instant, Beatrice opened her eyes one last time. "Emily, I'm here." Thank you for not letting me go." And with that, she closed her eyes and did not open them again. Thank you for not letting me go. As she spoke those words, a profound clarity settled over her. She looked past Emily and saw Margaret, still praying. Her whole life had been a long, cold wait for 5 doors to open. She had knocked, she had pleaded, she had waited on the doorstep until her heart froze. But now, holding the hand of a nurse who had become a daughter, watched over by a neighbor who had become a sister, Beatrice understood. Her love had not been wasted. It had simply been rerouted. It had been returned to her, not from the sons of her body, but from the daughters of her spirit. The account was balanced. The debt was paid. She was not leaving this world alone. She was being escorted. A lifetime of tension released from her shoulders. She was no longer a victim waiting for justice. She was a soul who had found peace. She didn't die alone. She died escorted by the neighbor who became a sister and the nurse who became a daughter. Her account was balanced. But now, the sons must face the final, legal consequences of their absence. The clock read 7:32 inches the morning. The sun was beginning to seep through the hospital hallway windows, tinting the pale tiles orange. In the distance, the first sounds of the shift change could be heard. Gurneys rolling, machines beeping, coffee cups being stirred with metal spoons. In room 212, everything was still silent. Beatrice was no longer breathing, not with her body. Her eyes were closed, but her face showed no pain. She had gone as she had lived, without making noise, without asking permission. With that simple dignity that demands no applause but leaves a mark. Daniel still held her hand, not moving, not crying. Michael stood motionless, his back straight, as if he were about to break but still holding on. David stared at the floor, bouncing one leg anxiously, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Thomas had kneeled by the bed, his head resting on the mattress, murmuring something no one could understand. Robert, on the other hand, had gone out into the hallway. He couldn't bear to stay inside when the monitor stopped beeping. Emily approached slowly, touched Daniel's shoulder gently. He looked at her with swollen eyes. "We already knew," Emily whispered. He nodded, then reached into the pocket of her scrubs. She took out the sealed envelope Beatrice had entrusted to her. She held it between her 2 hands, pressed against her chest. She asked me to wait, to open it in front of everyone when she was gone. Daniel stood up. Michael took a step towards her. David looked up. Thomas wiped his face. Robert came back, leaning against the doorframe. "What's in that envelope?" Robert asked. Emily took a deep breath. "The will, her last wishes. Are you going to read it?" Michael said. "Yes," Emily replied confidently. "She asked me to. Signed by a notary, dated 2 weeks ago. It's all in order." "And the house?" David murmured. "That too." They sat around. Margaret entered the room at that moment. She said nothing, just stood behind Emily, her hands clasped, her eyes closed, praying in silence. Emily opened the envelope carefully, took out 3 folded sheets, read the heading, confirmed the seals, and then began to read. "I, Beatrice Miller, in full possession of my faculties, sign and leave the following in writing." Emily's voice was firm, but her breath trembled. "I declare that I possess no assets other than the house where I lived for the last 30 years of my life. That house, which I built with work, sewing, selling food, and sleepless nights, will not be inherited by any of my sons. This is the moment." The single sentence, delivered after her death, that changes everything. This isn't an act of revenge. Beatrice called it justice. But if the house doesn't go to her bloodline, who did she trust with her entire life's work? The answer will redefine what family truly means. None of the brothers interrupted. Not a word, not a sigh. "I do not do this out of spite. I do it for peace, because I do not want what remains to be destroyed over a property that was mine, not yours. You had something more valuable, my time, and still, it was not enough for you." Emily took a breath, continued reading. "Therefore, I decide to leave my house, my furniture, my belongings, and everything that survives me to nurse Emily Solis, who not only cared for me, she saw me, she listened to me, And she did not do it out of blood ties. She did it out of human love, and that is worth more than any last name. Michael closed his eyes. David bowed his head. Robert let out a bitter snort and rubbed his face. Thomas clenched his fists. Daniel lowered his gaze and smiled with his eyes full. Emily put the document away. She said no more. Silence. Until Margaret stepped forward. She walked slowly to Beatrice's body. She placed her rosary between her hands, the same one she had brought the night before, and then murmured, "Rest, my friend. You've finished what you started." Minutes later, one by one, they began to leave the room. David was the first. He said goodbye with a gesture and walked down the hallway with long strides without looking back. Thomas stayed a few seconds longer. He touched Emily's arm. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Yes, I do, because you were there." He left. Michael was the only one who returned to the bedside. He kissed his mother's forehead. "Forgive me, Mom." And he left. Robert was the last. He walked towards the door but stopped. He came back. He spoke to her in a low voice. "I didn't know how to be here, but I also didn't know how to leave. I'm sorry for everything I didn't say in time." He left without looking back. Daniel stayed with Emily. And now what? Emily looked at him. "Now comes the hardest part." "The burial?" "No, living with the knowledge that you did come, but late." Outside, the sky was no longer gray. It was clear, clean, but not warm. And inside each of those 5 men, something began to hurt in a different way, because forgiveness is received, but regret remains. Beatrice's body had been removed shortly after dawn. It was wrapped with respect, in silence, accompanied by Emily and Margaret. None of the sons offered to do it, not out of disinterest, but because they didn't know how, because their hands, so accustomed to work, to routine, to ego, didn't know what to do with the body of a mother who no longer breathed. Outside, the sun shone without strength. It was a clear morning, but not a cheerful one. The air smelled of dampness, as if the entire city were in mourning without knowing for whom. In the hospital waiting room, the brothers sat in a row, not in a circle, not like a family, but like strangers, sharing a common memory and nothing more. Daniel didn't speak. Michael answered in monosyllables. Thomas didn't look up. Robert rubbed his eyes with his knuckles. David stood, pacing back and forth. "Have they notified the funeral home?" Michael asked. "Yes," Emily replied. "The body will be released in less than 2 hours." "And what are we going to do?" No one knew how to answer. The first to speak was Margaret. Beatrice didn't want a mass or expensive flowers. She wanted silence, but she also said she wanted to be buried with her gray shawl and her rosary. "I have them." "Where will it be?" Robert asked. "In the Lancaster Cemetery, there's a family plot. She paid for it herself years ago. It's next to her mother's." "And I have the papers too," Emily replied. "Everything is in order." She left everything prepared. Michael rubbed his face with both hands. His fingers trembled. He seemed about to say something, but he held back. It was David who broke the silence. "I don't think I'm ready for this." "None of us are," Daniel said without lifting his head. "But we have to do it," said Thomas. "Yes," Robert murmured. "We have to do it right, at least this time." The following hours were filled with clumsy movements, calls to acquaintances, coordination with the funeral home, paperwork with the hospital. No one argued, no one imposed. Everything was done without raising a voice, as if speaking too loudly was a lack of respect for the one who was no longer there. When Beatrice's body arrived at the house, every corner seemed smaller. The living room, with its old furniture, smelled of eucalyptus and dust. The armchair where she used to embroider was untouched. The rug where the children played was still there. The black and white portrait of her wedding, still hanging on the wall, although her husband had left more than 40 years ago, seemed to watch the scene with the same distance with which he had looked at his family. Emily and Margaret arranged everything. They set up a table with bread, coffee, and candles. They washed the floor, opened the windows. Beatrice returned to her home one last time, and there, for the first time in a long time, the 5 brothers sat in a circle. "When was the last time we were all together here?" David asked. "Thomas's communion." Robert replied. No, it was on Mom's 50th birthday, Michael corrected. No, I didn't come that day, Robert said. Exactly, Daniel added. We were never all here. Thomas lowered his head. And what now? No one knew how to answer until Emily, in a calm voice, spoke to them from the kitchen. What follows is what she asked for. Peace. That night, they held a wake for Beatrice without music, without speeches, only with whispered prayers, fragmented memories, and silences that spoke more than any anecdote. Emily spent the whole night in a chair next to Margaret, without moving. She observed every gesture, every detail. There was something sacred in that old house, something that didn't come from the ceiling or the walls. It came from Beatrice, from her presence that was still felt. Around 3 inches the morning, Daniel got up and went to his mother's room. He sat on the edge of the bed. On the nightstand, he found the notebook with the old drawings. Drawings made by them when they were children. Crooked hands, figures with big heads and small bodies, all signed for my mom. Why couldn't we see her for who she was? He whispered. Emily, who had entered without him noticing, replied, Because you thought she would always be there. The next day, they set off for the Lancaster cemetery. They walked behind the coffin with slow steps. No one spoke. Only the sound of footsteps on the loose dirt could be heard. The priest said what was necessary. Margaret prayed what Beatrice had taught her. Emily placed a white flower on the coffin before it was lowered, and the 5 sons just watched. They were silent. Daniel was the last to let go of the coffin's rope. He did it with firm hands, but with a broken heart. Looking up at the sky, he felt the wind give him something back. An echo, a word, a presence. It wasn't comfort, it was truth. And in that moment, he knew that what came next would not be easier, but it would be different. The coffin was lowered. The flowers the neighbors had brought, few but sincere, were beginning to wilt under the morning Sunday. The Lancaster cemetery, with its wooden crosses and old tombstones, held a thick silence, broken only by the flapping of some birds among the trees and the crunch of footsteps moving away. Margaret was the last to step away from the edge. She placed a small, lit white candle for Beatrice, stuck in the damp earth. She didn't cry, but her lips moved in constant prayer. May God receive you, sister, and if heaven is just, you will not lack for an embrace there. Emily held a plastic folder under her arm. It was the final hospital file. It no longer contained results or pending medications, only signatures from those who closed the final steps. There was no urgency, nothing more to attend to. The 5 brothers, on the other hand, didn't move. They seemed anchored to the ground. Daniel had red eyes. Michael stared at the horizon as if to avoid looking at his brothers. David had his hands in his pockets and his back hunched. Thomas was playing with the tag on his pants, tearing it off without realizing. Robert stood a little further away, his head down. It was Emily who broke the silence. Beatrice asked that we not have a long wake, but she did want us to eat together at her house. All of us. She said that? Thomas asked. Yes. Don't let them cry on an empty stomach, she told me. Daniel smiled faintly. A sad smile. Of course she said that. I don't know if I should stay, David murmured. Of course you should, Margaret replied firmly. It doesn't matter how long you were gone. You're here now, and that's enough. Michael was the first to start walking towards the exit. He said nothing, just began to move forward. The others followed him. The house was the same, smelling of old clothes, of reheated coffee, of memory. Emily had left some pies that Margaret brought from the market ready, pot coffee, and sweet bread. They sat at the table where they had eaten with Beatrice so many times, but this time there was no laughter, only served plates and spoons that made no noise. No one dared to mention the obvious, that she was gone, that she wasn't going to appear with her shawl, nor yell from the kitchen, nor tell the same old anecdote. Do you guys remember when Mom used to hide coins for us in the cookie tin? Daniel asked, trying to break the barrier. David let out a small snort. Yeah, and then she'd get mad, because we took them without permission. And it wasn't about the coin, Thomas said. It was about the without permission. Michael put his coffee down on the table. And what's going to happen with all this now? Robert looked up. With what? With the house, the furniture, her things, Daniel took a deep breath. The house isn't ours anymore. She made that clear. I don't mean keeping it. I mean, what do we do? It gets turned over, emptied, sold. From the kitchen, she listened in silence. I think we should leave it, David said, for a while. Don't touch anything. It still smells like her. And after that? After that, we'll figure it out together, without fighting. They all nodded. It wasn't an agreement. It was a truce. A few hours passed. Emily approached with the folder in her hand. Beatrice left something else. It's not in the will. It's a letter. It's not for me. It's for you, for the 5 of you. She placed it on the table, a white envelope with firm handwriting. For my sons together. Not before, not separately. Daniel took it gently, broke the seal, took out the sheet, and began to read aloud. If you are reading this, it's because I'm gone. I don't want this letter to make you sad. I want it to give you memories. I am not writing so you feel guilty, because there is no time for that anymore. I am writing to remind you that before you were adults, you were children, and I watched you grow. I saw when you fell. I saw when you hid your homework. I saw when you cried without saying why, and still, I loved you completely. You had me as a mother. I had you as sons. And though you didn't always know how to stay, I never left. Don't fight over my clothes. Don't argue over the memories. Don't break this house with your doubts. Just do me one favor. If one day any of you feels alone, come back to this house, sit at the table, pour some coffee, and talk about me, because only those who are forgotten truly die. With all that I was, your mother, Beatrice. The silence that followed the reading was not uncomfortable. It was clean. It was necessary, like a slow purification. Michael was the first to stand up. He went to the window, looked out at the tree in the yard. The same orange tree that Beatrice had planted decades ago was still there. It's bigger, David murmured. He approached, put a hand on his shoulder. She is too, even if we can't see her anymore. And they all knew that what came next would not be easy, but at least now they would not be so far apart. 3 days had passed since the burial. The house was still full, but not of people, of echoes. Every corner seemed to remember them. The clumsy steps of childhood, the shouts of fights, the toothless laughter, the tears hidden under the blankets, and the firm voice of Beatrice setting the rules of a world that revolved around a single woman. The dining room still had the coffee-stained tablecloths, the kitchen, the glass jars lined up as she left them. On the wall, the old clock had stopped at 4:12, the same time Beatrice had stopped breathing. No one dared to move it. Emily had returned to the hospital that morning. Margaret stayed at the house, sitting on the small bench in the yard with her rosary and a shawl over her shoulder, as if expecting Beatrice to appear through the back door with her usual voice. "The coffee's ready, my friend." But Beatrice was no longer there, and each one, slowly, began to wonder what was left of them without her. "I can't stay," David said as he packed his suitcase. "You're leaving already?" Daniel asked. "I have to go back. I left things there. Work, people who depend on me. And you?" David didn't answer immediately, zipped up the bag, lifted his backpack, and took a deep breath. "I don't know who I am now, but I know I don't want to be the one who left twice." Daniel hugged him for the first time in years, tightly, with everything, without a word, only with the truth of the gesture. Michael went for a walk that afternoon. He went alone. He ended up in front of the elementary school where he had studied as a child. It was the same. The blue gate, the rusty fence, the shouts of children at recess. He stood there for a while. He remembered the day Beatrice brought him a bag of cookies wrapped in a napkin because he had forgotten his lunch. That day, he scolded her. He told her not to come during recess, that she embarrassed him. He was 9 years old. 40 years later, Michael still couldn't find a way to remove that guilt from his chest. Thomas returned to his wife's house the next day. She greeted him with a stern look and a brief sentence. "And what did you gain by leaving?" "Nothing," he replied. "But I lost less than I would have by staying." They didn't speak of it again. That night, Thomas took the sack with his mother's things and placed it in the closet. He didn't touch it, didn't open it, But he knew that with that, something had changed in him, and that he would no longer let anyone decide for him ever again. Robert was the last to leave the house. He spent an entire night looking through his mother's photos. He found her young, with a serious gaze, holding a newborn David. Then with an apron, helping to sew a quinceañera dress. Later, on a bench surrounded by children in school sweaters. In no photo were all the sons together. Robert cried, not for her death, but for not having a single complete picture of what she loved most, her family. He went out to the yard at dawn. He stood in front of the orange tree. He spoke to it in a low voice. "You saw everything, didn't you?" The breeze moved the leaves gently. Robert closed his eyes, and for a moment, he could have sworn he heard her voice. Not in the wind, but inside. Daniel was the only one who didn't leave. Emily had returned to give him the keys with a letter in hand. "This is also yours," she said. "What is it?" "A letter your mom didn't finish. It's half written. It has no signature or recipient, but it's her handwriting." Daniel read it in silence. He didn't need to know who it was for. It was for everyone and for no one. "When I'm gone, don't think about what you gave me late. Think about what you can still give to those who remain. Some loves are not returned, but they are continued." He put the letter in his jacket, was left alone, poured himself a coffee, sat in the same old chair, and turned on the radio. Just as a host was saying, "There are mothers who leave, but don't really leave, because their voice stays stuck to the walls, to the aroma of bread, to the shadow of the yard. And if you close your eyes, you can still hear her." Daniel closed his eyes, and yes, he heard her. The wind blew strongly through the streets of Lancaster. It was December. The sky, covered by heavy clouds, did not let a single ray of sun through. And inside Beatrice's house, the cold was also felt in the bones, though not so much from the weather, but from the silence. The stove barely had enough strength to heat the water. Beatrice moved from one side of the kitchen to the other, with an old wool sweater and numb fingers. The radio was off, and the 5 plates she had set on the table were still empty. It was December 24th, Christmas Eve, and no one had called. 2 weeks earlier, Beatrice had written a brief note to each of her sons in blue ink with the trembling but clear handwriting of old age. In each, she said the same thing, with minimal variations. "This year, I'm not making a big dinner. I just want to see you for a little while. If you can't, that's okay. But if you come, let me know so I can make coffee and bread." She didn't ask for gifts. She didn't mention nostalgia. She only offered what she had left. A hug, a conversation, a hot coffee. None of them replied. That day, Beatrice went to the market in the morning. She bought a pound of dough, 2 brown sugar cones, a handful of cinnamon. With that, she would make hot chocolate. She had no turkey, no roast, no apple salad, but she had what she always used, the desire to receive, even if no one came. She spent the whole afternoon tidying up the house, changed the tablecloth, cleaned the little nativity figure her neighbor had given her years ago, and took out a box of old ornaments she kept in the closet. She only hung 2 ornaments, a red one and a gold one. They were the only ones that weren't broken. As night fell, she lit a candle, sat in the armchair by the window, and watched the street. Every so often, a family would pass by on their way to Mass at the church. Some children laughed, others played with sparklers. Beatrice clutched her cup of hot chocolate with both hands. She waited an hour, 2, 3. The phone didn't ring. The door didn't open. No one knocked. At 11:30, she stood up slowly, went to the kitchen, turned off the pot, poured the remaining hot chocolate into a glass, and put it in the refrigerator. She collected the 5 empty plates, rinsed them, and placed them upside down on the dish rack. Then she turned off the dining room light, returned to the living room, sat next to the nativity scene, and looked at the plaster baby Jesus with the paint worn off on its cheeks. She spoke to him in a low voice. "They didn't come, but it's okay. I'm here." She took the blanket from the armchair, threw it over her legs, and stayed there, watching the flame of the candle dance. She didn't cry, she didn't curse. She just took a deep breath and told herself what she had been telling herself for years. It's not the first time, but maybe it will be the last. This is the memory that haunts them. A mother, waiting by a cold window, with 5 empty plates on the table. This is the truth of their indifference. The last time she would ever wait for them to come home. At midnight, the church bell tower rang. 12 chimes, 12 strikes of metal that crossed the streets like a reminder. Families were hugging in their homes. Christmas carols played on the TV. In Beatrice's house, only silence accompanied the echo of her own strength. She stood up, blew out the candle, went to her room, took off her sweater, sat on the bed, and before lying down, she took a folded paper from the drawer. It was the letter she had written to Daniel when he was a child, the one he never answered, the one she had kept. She gave it one last look and put it under her pillow. The next day, Margaret was the first to knock on the door. She brought cinnamon rolls and a piece of funnel cake. "Beatrice, are you there?" She opened with the same smile as always. "I'm here, my friend, as always." On my feet. Margaret looked into her eyes. She knew no one had come. She didn't ask. She came in, put the bread on the table. They poured coffee, ate in silence, and when they finished, Beatrice said, "Christmas is not celebrated with those who come. It is sustained by those who do not leave." That memory was stuck in Daniel's mind. It came back to him like a whip every December, because he had read that letter and still didn't go. Now, sitting alone in the same living room where his mother spent her last Christmas on her feet, he thought of only one thing. What if this year I'm the one who sets the table? He looked at the time, picked up the phone, and for the first time in many years, wrote to the brothers' group chat. December 24th. "The house is still here. If you come, I'll be waiting." Daniel's message arrived in the WhatsApp group at 9:22 inches the morning, on December 24th. December 24th. "The house is still here. If you come, I'll be waiting." No one replied instantly. The double check marks appeared one by one. Michael read it after 4 minutes. Thomas left it on read. Robert took half an hour, and David was the only one who replied shortly after. "What do you need me to bring?" Daniel left his cell phone on the table without replying. He hadn't sent the message expecting anything in particular, not with hope or expectation. He did it because silence was no longer an option, because that year he didn't want to see another empty chair without having tried to fill it. At 10, Daniel opened the gate to his mother's house. He entered with a grocery bag. Inside were tortillas, a pound of beans, an onion, tomatoes, ground coffee, and 2 candles. The kitchen was the same, only empty, without the aroma of cinnamon, without the steam of hot chocolate, without the big pot bubbling with pies. He turned on the stove, put the beans on to cook, turned on the radio, and left the door ajar. At noon, the sound of the gate opening made him look out the window. It was David with a backpack on his shoulder and a slight smile on his face. "Are you sure the dinner is going to be here?" "Not sure, but it's the only place Mom never stopped opening, even if no one came in." David took a soda, a package of bread, and a small Christmas gift wrapped in cellophane from his backpack. "I didn't know what to bring," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "It's okay, nothing is required here, everything is appreciated." An hour passed, then another. At 3 inches the afternoon, Thomas wrote, "I'll be there at 5, but I can't stay all night." No one replied. No one complained. At 5 sharp, he knocked on the door. He came with a store-bought cake, an expression between nervous and repentant, and a jacket that his mother had knitted for him and that he never dared to wear in her lifetime. "I didn't come out of obligation. I came because I couldn't stay watching TV tonight." "Not again." "I understand," Daniel replied, giving him a hug that lasted longer than expected. The night began to fall. At 6:30, Robert sent a message. "I'm coming, but don't wait for me to say grace." When he entered, the first thing he did was look at the tree in the yard, then at the armchair in the living room, then at the kitchen. "It smells different," he said. "That's because Mom isn't here anymore," David replied. "No," Robert murmured. "It's because we are." Michael was missing. It was 7 inches the evening. Everyone had arrived. The food was served, the coffee made, the chairs occupied. Only one remained empty, the one Beatrice always used at the head of the table. No one wanted to sit in it. Daniel left a served plate in front of that chair with a pie slice, a little rice, and sweet bread. He placed one of the candles next to it. He didn't say why. He didn't make a speech. At 8, Daniel looked at his cell phone. Nothing from Michael. "He's not coming," Thomas said. "Maybe he will," Daniel replied without conviction. "It's late." "Yes, but for some things, it's never too late." At 8:20, someone knocked on the door. The 5 of them stood still. No one got up instantly. It was Daniel who opened it. There was Michael, his face distraught, his eyes dull, and a box in his hands. "It's Mom's," he said. "I found it in the closet. I never opened it." He entered without asking permission. He walked to the living room. He opened the box on the table. There were letters, photos, old receipts, and on top of everything, an unopened envelope with his name, Michael. He opened it there, in front of everyone. He read aloud, "You were the first. Because of you, I became a mother. And because of you, I learned that sons don't always stay, but a mother always waits. If you ever come back, if you ever finally sit at this table, don't say anything, just sit. That's enough for me." Michael couldn't continue reading. He sat in the only empty chair, Beatrice's. No one protested. David poured coffee. Daniel cut the bread. Thomas lit the second candle. Robert bowed his head and prayed an Our Father in silence. And that night, for the first time, no one was missing. They are all together, finally, at the same table. But the cost of this reunion was their mother's life. The chair at the head of the table, Beatrice's chair, is now empty forever. The lights in Beatrice's house were still on when the next day dawned. No one had slept completely. Some had dozed off in the dining room chairs, others on the back of the armchair. Daniel was the only one who stayed awake all night, sitting in the kitchen, stirring the cold coffee in an already empty cup. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear with a dull gray tone, as if the sun knew that this home was not quite ready for the light. It was December 25th, Christmas, but that house didn't smell of eggnog or cinnamon. It smelled of farewell. Emily arrived early, knocked once on the door, but didn't wait for an answer. She entered with a respectful silence, as if someone were still asleep. Seeing her, Daniel stood up. "Can I come in? You're part of this place now, Emily. Come in." She was carrying a new envelope, not one from a stationery store, but one of those that hold legal papers. It was the official document from the notary's office. The will. "They asked me to deliver this to you, not because it belongs to you, but because, as your mom told me, one thing is what is left and another is what is taught. Beatrice wanted you to know that her decision was not improvised. It was thought out. It was felt. It was just." The 5 brothers sat around the table. No one touched the envelope. It was as if each one was waiting for another to open it first. Emily left it in the center. She said nothing more, just waited. It was Robert who finally broke the silence. "And what are you going to do with the house?" Emily looked at him, surprised, not by the question, but by the tone. There was no resentment or irony, only sincere doubt. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "I don't feel I have the right to live here. But I also can't ignore what she entrusted to me." Michael took the envelope, opened it, and took out the documents. He began to read in a low voice. "It's all here. Deeds, copies of the will, the registration with the notary, all legal. Beatrice left a record that the house belongs to Emily, and she also stated that if she decided to sell it, she could. But if she decided to keep it, she should preserve it as a refuge." "A refuge?" Thomas asked. Daniel answered before Emily. "Yes, a place where you can always come back, even if there's no one waiting, even if you're no longer welcome anywhere. Mom used to say that the houses that are worthwhile are not the ones with value, but the ones with forgiveness inside." That day, Emily made a decision. "I'm not going to sell it, nor am I going to move in, but I am going to open the door." "To whom?" David asked. "To whoever needs it, like she did with me, and like you didn't know how to do for each other." No one argued. No one proposed anything else. And for the first time in a long time, it seemed that what was left was not a broken family, but an opportunity. That afternoon, Margaret arrived with bread and the same small wooden box where Beatrice kept her old photos. "Do you want to see them, Emily?" "Yes, please." They opened it together. Daniel came closer. then Robert, then the others. There were black and white portraits, others in color, but faded. Some blurry, poorly focused, cut in half. "Look," Margaret said, pointing to a photo. "Here's Beatrice with all 5 of you. It was on Daniel's birthday. Look how she's hugging him." Daniel looked at the image for a long time. "I don't remember that day. That's because you were asleep when it was taken." But she remembered. She always remembered. The day ended with fewer words and more gestures. Emily made coffee. Margaret served the bread. And each of the brothers, without saying it out loud, knew that that afternoon was not for dividing what was left, but for preserving what still hurt. Before leaving, Michael approached Emily. "Can I ask you for something?" "Of course. When you clean out the closet, if you find the gray sweater I gave her, will you save it for me?" "Yes, I'll save it for you." David came over next. "I don't want anything from the house. Just a letter, the one she wrote to me. I'd like to frame it, put it where I can see it." Robert, for his part, asked for silence, and Thomas asked to stay a few more days without explanation, just to stay. When everyone had gone, Emily turned off the lights, closed the patio door, sat in the living room, and looked at the picture frame that Margaret had left on the shelf. Beatrice smiling, the same dress she wore to her friend's wake, the same smile that was never repeated. Emily caressed the frame and murmured, "Thank you for not letting go of me, even though I wasn't your daughter." She stood up, went to her room, and in the silence of that house, the echo of a soft voice seemed to continue filling the air. It wasn't a hallucination. It was memory, and it was alive. A week after the funeral, Beatrice's house was alone again. Not alone like before, not with that icy silence that had enveloped it for years, but alone like land that has just been sown. Emily continued to go every afternoon. She didn't sleep there, but she kept the windows open, watered the plants, dusted. She had turned the dining room into a small reading nook, and the kitchen into a place where coffee was never lacking. It wasn't her house, but it wasn't anyone else's either. The neighbors would peek in respectfully. Some left bread, others candles. A boy from the alley knocked on the door every Saturday to ask if he could water the orange tree in the yard, and Emily always said yes. Daniel would stop by on Sundays, sit in the armchair with the radio on, not talking much, just looking at the old photos that still hung on the walls. Some were crooked, others faded, but he didn't dare take them down. "Nothing gets changed here," he would say. "You only clean what time has left behind." David returned to California, but before he left, he promised to come back in March for her birthday. Not his mother's. "This time I want to celebrate it," he told Emily. "Even if she's not here." Thomas returned to his house with a copy of the letter Beatrice wrote him. He taped it to the back of his closet door. His wife read it in silence. She said nothing, but from that day on, she served him coffee every morning. Robert offered to fix the roof. He brought tools, painted the door frame, changed the lock. No one asked him to. No one expected it. He just did it. Michael was the one who returned the least, but one day he left a box of documents at the entrance. Inside were birth certificates, house papers, old receipts, and an envelope with a note. "Thank you for taking care of what we didn't know how to care for. Don't look for me. But don't forget me either." Emily put the envelope away without opening it. On the afternoon of the first month without Beatrice, Margaret brought a small altar. She placed it under the black and white photo hanging in the living room. She lit a candle, put a clay cup with coffee, an embroidered napkin, and a sweet roll. She liked it like this, with little, but with meaning. Emily joined her. Sitting in front of the altar, they spoke little, watched a lot, and then Margaret, in a firm voice, read the last letter that Beatrice had dictated to her but never managed to write in her own hand. "If they ever come back, tell them that I am no longer here, but that I am in every corner, in every dish, in every flower that wasn't picked, in every silence that is respected, and in every time someone sits at this table without being afraid to stay." That night, Emily posted a photo of the altar. She didn't write a caption, just one word: "Thanks." The next morning, the post had hundreds of comments. Some from strangers who had followed the story on the radio, others from neighbors, others from people who never knew Beatrice, but said they had known many like her. One woman wrote, My mom's name was the same, and she also left without us knowing how to see her. Today, I feel less alone. Another wrote, "There are women who are not buried. They remain planted." In the end, the 5 sons sat at the same table in their mother's house, but the most important chair was forever empty. Beatrice's will was not a punishment. It was her final lesson. Careers can wait, money can be re-earned, but a parent's time cannot. The house was not given to bloodline, but to humanity, to nurse Emily, the only one who gave her the most precious thing, presence. If you believe presence is worth more than any property, write the word time in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we never miss powerful lessons like this one.